Hello and welcome to this course. We're going to be looking at how you can build and deploy your own portfolio website. So just a quick overview, this is roughly the design we're going to be doing. So we're not seeing everything right now, but to give you a bit of an idea that it will be fully responsive and hopefully you think that it does look pretty good. Before we get started, I do want to say that this course is being brought to you by DigitalOcean and Scrimba. So they are bringing you this course, and DigitalOcean has been nice enough to give you a free credit to get started on their platforms. You'll be able to sign up and claim that free credit. But if you don't want to do it right now, you want to wait until the site has been built up. I'll also be mentioning it again later on in this course. Before we jump into what we're going to be building, just in case you don't know, my name is Kevin, and it is nice to meet you. Thank you for taking this course with me. I do teach both in the classroom and online, and as of the time of recording, I have over 100,000 subscribers over on YouTube, where I teach mostly about CSS as well as HTML, a little bit of JavaScript, and just front-end development in general. I'm a bit of a self-described CSS evangelist, though CSS is something that I really love. It is a language that a lot of people seem to get really frustrated with, and it's one that I really, really enjoy. So I hope that going through this course, you see both my passion for CSS, but we're going to be doing a lot of fun coding up in this one. So I'm hoping that you also see a little bit of the light of CSS along the way as well. And if it's something that you do struggle with, hopefully I can help you out with that a little bit. So in this course, we are going to be creating our portfolio website, and we're going to be setting up the structure, but allowing you to customize it how you want to. So I am going to be doing this with static files. I'm doing HTML and CSS. But the idea here is that you can then take it and do what you want with it. So I don't want to limit people in how they can use it. If you're new to HTML and CSS, you can keep it as static files. If you're a bit more advanced, maybe you'd like to use a static site generator like Jekyll or Eleventy or something else to build out the site. Or of course, you could turn it into a React app or a Vue or even maybe something like Svelte, whatever it is that you want. And the reason that I'm doing it this way is because everybody who's watching this course might have a different approach on it. So I'm going to focus on the CSS side, where things won't really be very different. The structure of things are going to be there. So I'm focusing on the design side, building out something that looks really fantastic. We're going to structure it all properly, but then leaving you the opportunity to build it out the way you want to. Now, one thing that's really important with this is I am assuming you're already comfortable with both HTML and CSS. So I'm going to be building this, as I said, as a static HTML website template. I'm going to be using CSS custom properties, though, to make it as customizable as possible. So I don't want to just leave you with the design that's done. I want you to be able to make changes to the fonts, the colors, and all of that. So early on, we're going to set up the custom properties, and near the end of the course, we're going to look at how you can modify those custom properties to change it to make the site what you want it to be. We're going to be using both Flexbox and Grid for it. But it is not an in-depth tutorial on Flexbox or Grid. If these are some things that you're not super familiar with, there might be other lessons that can really help you out. But what I'm going to be doing is, in pretty much any lesson that introduces a topic that might need a bit more detail, in the about of that lesson, there will be links to more in-depth tutorials in those videos. So it might be linking to something that I've done here on Scrimba, it might be linking to things other people have done here on Scrimba, or it might be linking off to some of my YouTube videos. So if you get to something on Grid that you're not too sure about, there'll be a link to that. I talk about BEM, there's going to be a link to what BEM is, things like that, to get a little bit more information where you can go more in depth on any topics that you might not be super clear on, because this is going to be about building our site. It's not going to be teaching you HTML and CSS. There's tons of awesome, fantastic tutorials already here on Scrimba to go over the complete basics of it. And once you're comfortable with that, you can come back here. So along with building it all out, we're going to be seeing how we can easily get it up and running using DigitalOcean. So in the early videos, it's going to be about building the site. And then in the future videos near the end, once we've finished building everything, we're going to look at DigitalOcean, how we can actually get it online through their service. So one thing that's important is you can access the design files at any time with this link right here. So you can click on it right now. But if you don't want to click on it now, or if you do open it now and close it at one point and come back later to these lessons because you don't finish everything in one shot, that's completely fine. In pretty much every lesson's about, I'm going to link to this file as well. Now, this file is a link to my Adobe XD file. You'll be able to get things like all the font information, the colors I've used, the spacing, the sizes, the text that I've used if you want to copy and paste it really quickly. Pretty much everything you need is there. Now, if you click on that link, it's going to open up a tab that looks a little bit like this. The thing that's a little bit annoying about these Adobe XD links is they put it onto comment view, but what we can do is you can click down here where it has this little coding type icon. And when you click on that, it's going to switch it over to something that looks like this, where you're going to see all the colors, the font information, font sizes, the colors, different things. If you click on different elements on here, it's going to highlight the information on that. So it can be a really nice, easy way for you to grab the different things that you need. Now, the problem also is that it goes straight to the mobile view. So if you don't want the mobile one, you want the desktop version. On the top left side, you'll see the name of the project, and you'll also see it says mobile. And if you click on the project portfolio website, it's going to bring you to a view like this, and you can just click on desktop and get all the same information for the desktop view of this as well. And with all of that out of the way, let's get started. All right, so here we are. We're about to start the project. I'm so excited because I love starting new projects. So what we're going to be doing in this is just setting the very basics of it up. And one part of that, just really quickly, is I have supplied all of the images here in the images folder. So those are the ones I will be using. If you don't want to be following along within Scrimba, you want to be doing this on your own in your own code editor or having your own files, what you can do is in your Scrimba editor, you can click on the little gear icon that you see there. When you click on that, you'll get some options. One of them is to download the zip. And when you download that, it will give you all of the images along with any code that I have on the screen when you hit that download zip. So if you do want to download it later on when I have some work done to compare to what you've done, you can also do that if you run into any issues or something like that, if you are coding it on your own, or if you work completely in the Scrimba editor and then you want to download all the files at the end, you can do that. This could be something you're doing with your own images. You don't have to be using mine. And, if this is for your portfolio, please use your own images and set everything up the way you want to be setting it up. So we do have a few things we're going to have to do to start this up. So the basic document structure here, we're going to need our doc type HTML. And we need an HTML open and HTML close just like that. Now, if you want, you can also come on your HTML and set the language to be English, or if you're setting up your site for another language, of course, you can go ahead and do that to whatever language your website is in. It's not 100% essential to do that, but it does help things know what language your website is in. Of course, we're going to need a head, so we can do our open and close head, and we're going to need a body, and we can close our body like that. So for the rest of this video, we're going to be working in the head, and then in the next one, we'll graduate off into the body of our document. So if we come and look here, the first thing I'm going to do is a meta tag for the car set of UTF-8. That's just pretty much standard. And there is one more meta tag we're going to need here, which is our viewport. So name is equal to viewport. And we're going to do some content in here, and our content is going to be equal to width equals device width, comma, initial scale is equal to 1.0. This is to make sure that your website actually functions properly on small devices as well as big ones. If you do not include this and you open your website on a phone or a tablet or any other mobile device, it will be like the desktop site zoomed out on your phone, which will just look terrible. So this just ensures that everything will work responsively and everything will be great. And here we can do our title. I'm calling mine Dev Jane Portfolio Website. The last couple of things that I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a couple of links. One of them is going to be to normalize, which this is actually already brought in by Scrimba. So if you're downloading through that little gear icon that I showed you, it will come. It generally comes with a normalize in there already because Scrimba by default uses normalize. If you don't know what normalize is, it's a CSS file that pretty much helps even out all the differences between the different browsers, because there's not huge ones, but there are some differences between them still. It irons out some bugs, tries to make them all behave in the same way. It just makes it a little bit easier to have the website looking the same in all of our browsers. And the other thing that I'm going to bring in right now is the link to Font Awesome. So you can actually copy this directly from the Scrimba editor here, but both of these I have got from cdnjs.com. So if you want to get other links to things, you can always do that. Now, I have linked to the all thing here of Font Awesome. I'm not going to be doing a deep dive into what Font Awesome is, but we are using it for the social icons down at the bottom. You only really need to access the brands one, but I'm putting the all here just in case on your site you do want to have access to more of them. But if you only need the brands, you could always change that over. Either go to Font Awesome, they'll give you a unique link to use that's for if you only want the brands, or of course from CDNJS, you can also get that brands link. We're also going to need to get into the Google Fonts as well as our own CSS file as added links here as well. I'm not going to be doing that. I'm going to wait until we're writing our own CSS before we go ahead and do that. So because we will be waiting until then to put both of those in, for now we are completely done. We're going to be moving into the body, setting up the header in the next video. I look forward to seeing you there. All right, so here's the entire project that we will be building. And just as a reminder, you can access everything you need for this by clicking the link that is on the screen right now. That will bring you to the Adobe XD sort of link file thing that I have. So it gives you access to all the text, the colors, the font information, font sizes, the font families, all of that, if you want to follow along with how I've set it up. But of course, you can just follow along with what I'm doing as well. But it can also make it so you can see it on your screen while we're coding, because that can be convenient. If not, I have also broken the different sections down into different slides that I'll be referencing back to as I'm coding things up. But for this first one where we're doing the header only, the header has the logo and the navigation in it, which is hidden away right now. So I'm not going to be opening this up too often in this video, but both of those are there. And again, if you do need to get that link, I'm going to link to it in the description of every video. So if ever you didn't click on it or you close the tab, you'll easily be able to access it again. So let's come in here into my body. And the first thing we will do is put in a header, and I'll close that header off. And inside of my header, we're going to have a couple of things. I'm going to do a div class of logo and close div. And inside of there, I'm going to put an image. src is going to go to my image folder, dev jane.png. I am going to put an alt tag on this. So that's for my alt text. I'm going to leave it blank though. And a lot of people think that if you have alt, you have to put something on it. You need to have the alt there. It's important that you have your alternative text. But if it's something decorative and a logo, it's generally decorative, you can have that just as a blank alt like that. It is perfectly fine. You don't need to put logo, because if the person hears logo, it doesn't help them if they cannot see it in the first place. So we can just leave it like that. There is no problem whatsoever. And then let's come down to here. And I've put this in a div because maybe you want to set this up as an SVG or do other things with it. So, we could do a lot of different things. And by, we're always styling the div that it's inside. Maybe this is text. There's different options that you can do. I am trying to make this as template-y as possible. The next thing we need in here is a button. I'm going to give this a class of nav toggle, because name sort of speaks for itself. That's going to be the toggle button that we can click on to open and close our navigation. And I will give it an area label of toggle navigation, because there's no label for it. There's no text that tells us what this button is being used for. So it is important to put an area label on there to help out a little bit for accessibility reasons. And inside of that, I am going to do a span class of hamburger. Close span. There's nothing actually in there. It's a blank. It's just going to be something we're going to style up and make it look like our hamburger, because we're going to animate that and do some fun things with it as well. Last but not least, in our header, we're going to have our nav itself. And I give this a class of nav, and you might say that's a little redundant, and it kind of is, but it's the way I like to work. So we're going to stick with it. If you don't want to have it, you don't need it. But when I'm writing my CSS, for the most part, I like to be selecting classes and just single classes. I am going to make a couple of exceptions in here for, say, the logo maybe, and a few other things. You're going to see that I do like putting my classes on everything, and I'm going to be using a system called BEM as well. And so it would be nav __ list. And I realize that that might drive some people a little bit crazy having the double underscore there. The reason I'm doing a double underscore is with the BEM system, this is saying that this list is a subcomponent of my navigation here. We're also going to have our nav items, our nav links. Everything is going to have a class, and it just makes it a little bit easier when you're reading the CSS later to know if something belongs as part of something bigger, or is it a modification of something. You're going to see we're going to have a few examples of that throughout this project. And it's maybe a little bit longer to do a double underscore. We're going to have times where there's a double hyphen, but it is a choice that I'm making very specifically because I do think BEM is, I like BEM, but I also think it's going to make it easy if you want to go into the CSS later to modify it, to quickly be able to identify what you want to change and to be able to change it very fast. So in here, we're going to have our li. So li class will be nav item. And then in there, we can have our links, a href. We're going to set these all up after. So I'm just going to leave it as a hashtag for the moment. And that first one can be our home section. And I'm just going to copy this, paste, paste, just like that. And obviously, if you wanted to add or remove sections from this, it would be very, very easy to do. And for our header, that is everything that we need. So in the next video, we will explore the introduction section, or that main section that has the picture with the name in it. Look forward to seeing you there. All right, so I've decided we're going to be doing the intro section as well as this because both of them are relatively simple. So we're going to do both of those in one shot before moving on to the next one. Looking at it here, it might look a little bit complicated, but with the green bar, you might be going, how are we going to do that? Don't worry about that. Looking at it, we just need to know what are the different pieces of content we have here. So let's come here. I'm going to put a comment at the top. This is going to be introduction. Just to try and make it a little bit easier, and it could be a bigger comment if you want it to. And we're going to do a section on this. So section class is equal to intro. And I'm also going to give this an ID of home. The ID could be different, but it's what we're eventually going to set these up. And actually, we're here, so we might as well do it. We can set my link of home right away to work on that. So it's the only reason I'm putting an ID on it. I personally don't use IDs for styling things. I only use IDs for anchors like this, or sometimes for JavaScript functionality and some other stuff. But I use my classes for styling. I use IDs for anchoring because that's sort of what they're good for. And close section. In this section, we have a couple of things. We're going to have our H1. I will give this a class. And remember, I told you everything is going to have a class on it. So it is going to have a class of section title because it is a title of my section. But I'm also going to be modifying that a little bit. So we're also going to call it my section title intro. And I realize, again, that that's a little bit long. People might not like writing all of this, and BEM is a choice that I am making. But in this case, I do think is a worthwhile case because it makes it really obvious what's going on. So the double hyphen here is saying that it's a modifier class. So it's going to modify this section title to be a little bit different from the default section title because there are some changes that we do need to make to that. So in my section title, intro, we do have a bit of text in here. So most of it I'm going to copy and paste, but for now I'm just going to write, hi, I am, because here we do need our strong tag, and it's a short bit of text, Jane Smith, and close strong, and we can, there's my close of my H1 there. And then we can come in with a paragraph. Class is equal to section subtitle. And I'm going to do a section subtitle intro because it's going to need some modifications on there. And we can say front end dev, close paragraph. And last but not least, we do need the picture. So we have an image. The image is in our image folder, and the name of it is devjane01. So devjane01.jpg. Again, you can feel free to replace these with your own pictures. Different dimensions on these pictures should work okay, but if you do want to use it, just download everything. You can check the dimensions on the picture itself, and you should be good to go. That is it for that section. So let's come down and do the next one here, which will be my services. I like having just comments at the top of things, or sometimes if we have lots of closed divs, I might put some comments to say what those are actually closing. Not that it's hard to navigate, but it just gives you a little visual clue when you're scrolling through a whole bunch of stuff where a new section of content is starting. So here we can do my section class equals my services. Could just be services, I guess. And we'll do that for the ID, services. We can come back up into my links, or my links here for my navigation, and add services there. So this is going to link with the ID down here. And we can close that section off. And inside that section, let's just take a quick look at what we want. So we have a title with a little underscore on it. So that's going to be another little modifier class because we're just going to do that as a pseudo element on the title. And then we need 3 columns and a button down at the bottom. We can have an H2 class is equal to section title. And that will be a section title services. What I do, close H2. And so that's going to be the title. We can control the color, the underline with the pseudo element all on there. And then we need to have 3 columns. So for the 3 columns here, I'm going to do a div class of services. So that's going to help us create the 3 divs, or the 3 columns that we need. And inside each one of those, I will have a div class called service. So it's my individual service. And then We can close that div, and inside each one of those, we'll have an H3, close H3, and each one will also have a paragraph. I'm going to put a comment here, close service, because we will have a whole bunch of divs, and the indenting on that is a little off. So copy, paste, and I'll come through and do the text on that off screen afterward. I forgot to close my services, so we can say that that's my close services. And then here I need to have an href is equal to, I don't know what we'll call it yet. That'd be my work. We can probably just call it work. And then the class will be equal to btn and close a, and in there my work. So that is the structure that we are going to need for that section. When we're off screen, I will come through and put all the text in. So when you start the next video, everything will be exactly the same, but the text will be there, and we can continue on with the next section we have in the site. All of the text is in place. I also forgot the closing paragraph, so those are also there now, and we can move on to the next section of our site. So that one will be, let's just call it About Me. And let's go take a look at what we're going to need for this one. So just like the title up above, it is pretty simple. There might be a few things in here you may not be sure about, but the overall organization and structure of this one's pretty simple. The next one will be too, so we're just going to finish off all the HTML in this one because there isn't too much to do. And then we can get into the fun part, which is our CSS. So here we need a new section. Class will be About Me, and we can give it the ID is equal to About. I am Canadian, so about me. Might as well come up right now and link that, about, and I think this one we'll just call it work. So we'll put that in right away. That's what we already had that set up for our link there, so that is good. Close section. And inside this section, what do we have? We have another title. So H2, you're going to see this a lot. Class is equal to section title, and then section title about. This one is who I am. Close H2. We will throw our paragraph on here for a subtitle. So class is equal to section subtitle and section subtitle about. Close paragraph. Some people like using headings as subtitles, but in general, it's kind of frowned upon. A heading sort of the next level of content. So you have your H2, then if you had like a subsection to your H2 and you had several H3s, that would make sense. A little bit like here, we have our what I do is the section, and then we have subsections. We have design and development, we have e-commerce, we have WordPress. So by having those different sections in here, that's more what a heading is used for. It's less a title and then a subtitle. So just using a class on a paragraph is generally a little bit of a better way to do it. You could also, if you wanted to, actually put in a new header and close header for each one of these sections, for every single section like that as well. So you're saying this is the header for that section. I'm not going to bother with that, but if you wanted to, it's it's very valid to work that way. As well. So in there we have that. And then I'm going to have one more thing. I'm going to have a div class equals, we'll call it About Me body. So it's like a subsection. Once again, that's why we have the double underscore. Here we have About Me, and then this is a subsection to that. So, or it's a component of my About Me. So I'm putting a div, or that's why we have the double underscore there. And then in that div, we're going to put in the paragraph, or we're going to have 2 paragraphs of text, close paragraph. This is important that, and you could technically get up to 5 paragraphs in here or have only 1 paragraph if you wanted to, and it wouldn't cause any issues whatsoever. But it's important that we group it all together just to be able to handle exactly where it's going to go inside of this section. And then after that, we have one more thing we're going to need, which is our image. I don't know if it's really a bus, but we'll stick with that. And that's image dev jane.02.jpg. There we go. So that is good. Close section. And as I mentioned, we're going to finish off all of the HTML for this one. So this is going to be my work. This one's going to be pretty simple. So section class will equal my work. ID we said would be work. So in here, once again, we're going to need our h2 class equals section title. I don't know if we're going to need to have a modifier class on that, so I'm going to leave it like that right now. We might need one to change the color of it because the color of this one is going to be white, and that's a little bit different. We're going to see. And actually, I'm looking at it now because these have a background on them and this one doesn't. We might be coming back in here to make some small changes later on. But for now, let's leave it like this. And also, I haven't put any text. I'll do that off screen so you don't have to see me copying and pasting. Class is equal to section subtitle. And the part that's going to be the most important here is we're going to put in a div class. We're going to give this a class of portfolio. Inside the portfolio, we're going to have each one of them is going to be an A. We're going to replace the href on this eventually, but for now, we'll just put a hashtag with a class of portfolio, double underscore item, because it's the individual item, close A. And then inside each one of those links, we will have an image, src. I'll put the first one, can't spell portfolio today. Portfolio01.jpg. ALT, I'm going to leave blank for now, but that could be something you fill in on your own if you want to put a little description of what the project is. And the class on each one of these will be portfolio double underscore img because it's the portfolio image. Portfolio item 01. I'm going to speed this up as I do it because I think a little comment on each one of these will make it easier when you're setting everything up. All right, so that is done. Let's hit save because I haven't saved yet. And let's see, hopefully everything is actually showing up on here. So it looks like everything is there. We didn't get any errors. My images are all loading in. So we're off to a good start on all of that. I'm going to close that off because we don't really need it right now. And last but not least, footer. Awesome. We're right at the end. The footer is pretty straightforward. So we can do footer, close footer. And in here, we're going to have a couple of things. We need an href of mail2. I'm going to put hello at jane.dev with we'll put a comment down here. Class is also going to be footer link. And that can just say hello at jane.dev, close A. Replace with your own email address. Right, so there you can just make sure that this and this here are your own email address if you are planning on using this for your own site. UL, we can have a class of social list, close UL. I'm not doing this as like a footer thing, and this is my footer link, and actually that should be a double underscore on there. I'm not doing this because technically it could be something that could be used in other places. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the footer. So I'm not calling it like footer social list or something like that, but it could be if you wanted it to. We're going to have an li with an a in it, close a, close li. The list item itself will have a class, you guessed it, of social list item. It's going to be a lot like our navigation. Class is equal to social list link. This is a place where you could have another class on this also of like unstyled list that you could use for both of them and just remove, because both of them, there's a lot of similarities between the two lists. And then on top of that, they'll have some modifications to it. So if you wanted to take that approach to it instead of the way I'm doing it here, that would be perfectly acceptable and result in a little bit drier code in the long run. So I'd be all for that. For now, let's put some hrefs on these. They're just going to go to the generic site. So I'm going to speed this up while I put them all on. All right, and there we go. And you'll see for now, I've just put an ABC. We should have a D on that last one. What did I do wrong? I put the D in the wrong spot. So ABCD as the links, because when I put in the font awesome, I'll explain a little bit of how that's working, just in case you want to change it out for your own icons. So when we do the footer, I'll go into more detail on that. For now, that is everything. We'll probably be jumping back into the HTML a little bit as we write our CSS, just in case there's a thing or two along the way that we need to add. But for the most part, that is done. That is the structure of everything we need. So from there, we can go ahead and start styling this up. The fun parts are starting in the next video. All right, so we're going to be jumping into actually styling things up, which is always the most fun. If you want to get the different font information, the weights, the colors, the sizes, all of that, and just the colors in general that I used in this, you can click here once again to get to that Adobe XD link. Now, to get started on this, in this video, we're just going to be setting up some of the general things. I'm going to be doing a lot of CSS custom properties in here. If you're not super familiar with them, they're going to make sense pretty quickly. So we're going to be starting with that. We're going to be setting up our basic fonts and getting all of that set up in this one. So the first thing we need to do is actually create a CSS file. So if you're in your own code editor, you can do that how you're used to doing. If you're following along here in Scrimba, you can right click in Scrimba where it says files, and you can make a new file there. And actually, before I do that, I'm going to make a new folder called CSS. And then inside my new CSS folder, I'm going to make a new file called style.css, and we can get started in here. But before I write anything, nothing will show up because we're not linked. So I'm going to come down here and link to my own CSS file, .css, and just so we can make sure that it's all working, why don't we come into there and say body background is red and see if that worked. So I'll save that file, I'll save the changes I made there, and now we can see that my body is definitely coming in as red, so that is fantastic. Now, really quickly before we move on, you might have noticed there was a white background on that. If you did download these images and you want to follow along with exactly these ones, you might have to download them again. Just there was a weird white box on that had a bit of a extra spacing on it because of the shadow that I'd put on. I have removed it. It is updated. I'm really sorry about that, but you can grab the new images now if you are following along. But again, I'm assuming that you're doing this using your own images to replace these ones. But that has been fixed. So if you want to download the images again, you can do that. Sorry once again. And we can now get rid of our body background red on that, hit save, and we can see that that has disappeared. Now, before we actually start writing any CSS, I am going to do one more thing where I'm going to come in here and put a link to the Google fonts that I used in my document or in my design. So update these with your own fonts if you do. Now, if you like the fonts I've used, these are the ones I'm going to be using. The first one is the source sans the code version, which is the monospace font that was here. I only use the regular, but I want to make it really easy for you to update. So if you did want to switch this out for like the 300 or the 500 or whatever it is, you can just update the numbers here or add new numbers to it. And the same thing, I'm using the light and the black, but if ever you needed more, you could just change those numbers, or you can go over to Google Fonts, just switch this out completely with the ones you want to be using. We're also going to be using a whole bunch of custom properties, so it's going to make it really easy for you to update all the fonts throughout the whole site, but you might have to just switch out that link right there with the fonts you want to be using to do it. So coming into here, the very first thing I am going to do is a star, comma, star before, comma, star after, to set up my box sizing border box, because I do that on every single project. It just makes our life so much easier. If you're not too sure about box sizing border box, it's just changing how padding is calculated to make it within a width instead of adding onto the total width of something. It just makes our lives so much easier when we're setting things up. The other thing I'm going to do is come on here on my root to set up some custom properties. So the first thing I'm going to do is have a font family of, if this was my own project, I'd probably call it font family sans and then font family code or font family mono or something like that. Because I do want this to be something that could be used for other purposes, I am going to call this font family primary and a font family secondary. Just in case you end up using different fonts from what I'm using in here, I do think that makes the most sense to do. So my primary one is my Source Sans Pro. So we can bring that in right there. And my code is that one right there. I'm just copying and pasting these directly from Google Fonts. The next thing I'm going to do is set up my font weight. So I'm going to have a font weight of regular, which is going to be my 300, and a font, whoops, that should have a double hyphen. And here, font weight of bold, which will be my 900. Now, if you're not used to custom properties, you haven't used them, this is not like BEM where I'm doing this out of, just for fun. This is how custom properties do have to work with the double hyphen on here. We're going to have a color of a background, which is just going to be my FFF. We'll have a color text, which is my 30, 30, 30. Actually, a lot of time I'll do that, but I'm going to call this color light, color dark, because again, we might want to be doing this. You might want to change these colors around for your own design, and a color accent, which is my 16E0BD, which is the main greenish color that I use throughout this whole site. And we're going to set up some font sizes. So I'm going to say a font size of H1 of 3 rem. I always set my font sizes in rems. Font size H2, 2.25 rem. Font size H3 will be 1.25 rem. These are all things I calculated already based on my mockup and just playing around a little bit with it. We'll stick with 1 rem on my body. And the nice thing with font sizes, or the nice thing with if you've ever used something like Sass where you've set up using variables are awesome. They're amazing, but these CSS native ones are great because you can actually change them within a media query, which was not something you could do inside of Sass or Less or any of those other ones you might have been using. I'm going to be setting up a pretty generic media query here of 800 pixels, but I do think it works well for this design. But it could be something that you could look at changing in your own if you find that it's not working, but I think it's going to work well for what we're doing here. And what I'm going to do is redefine my font sizes here to make them bigger at larger screen sizes. So we have our font size H2, 3.75 rem. Font size H3 will be 1.5 rem. And my font size body will be 1.125 rem. And that way, once we hit this, we don't have to redefine it within our actual CSS. These are being redefined here, so everything should just magically change for us as long as it's been properly set up using those, so that we can come all the way to here, and I can just put custom properties, update these for your own design. And whoops, I'm so used to. We need comments that look like this. There we go. Custom properties. There we go. And then we can do general styles. So in my general styles, what are we going to do? Let's just make some room here and then come back up. So the first thing, we're going to select our body, and we're going to set the background on here of var color light. So let's hit save. And the nice thing with this, with the custom property, is now if you decide to change the color of it, so you can see right now we have the white background on there, but if I change this to, let's say, accent, it's going to change the background color to everything to accent like that, where the accent color is coming in, or if we change it to dark, we can quickly change the color scheme of our whole site. So let's bring that back up to light for now. And then, so we have light on there. Our color will be our var color dark. So if you needed to change anything, you can just invert that, and all of a sudden you'd have a dark color scheme, which we're going to sort of be using when we get down to that, at least to change the font colors. Or when we get to my work area, we can easily set that dark background on it, just like that. Other things on here we're going to want to set. We do have a margin of 0. We'll put our font family on here. We're going to put our var font family primary on there. We're going to have our font size, var font size body. And now you can sort of see where that FS or FW and all of that I used along the way, why I did it. I'm going to line height. I use a 1.6 as sort of a default line height that I like to use on everything. So if we hit save and we come back, we should see a lot of those things coming in. The fonts are working and a few other things. We're getting there. We're almost done with the general setup. Another general thing that I like to do is just setting my images to have a display of block, which gets rid of some issues that sometimes come up with images, and also setting a max width of 100% on them, just so they don't grow bigger and overflow at the side of their parents. Next up, we're going to come and just set up our basic typography, which is a word I have way too much trouble pronouncing sometimes, or not pronouncing, but spelling. For something I write a lot. So we're going to have our H1, H2, and H3 are all going to have a line height of, we're going to try 1.1 and adjust from there, but because they're going to be a bigger font sizes in general, if they break on 2 lines, they definitely need the smaller line height on them. And I'm going to put a margin of 0 for now. That might have to get revisited, but in general, the headings, you want to get rid of the margins and maybe keep a bit of a margin top, maybe a small margin bottom, but we're just going to do a bit of a reset on there. And then on H1, I'm going to set a font size of var, and we're going to do our font size H1. And you can probably guess what we're going to do for the other ones. I'm just going to copy this actually, and we can set that up with an H2 and that as an H3. And over here, we can have our H2 and my H3. So if we save that and we come take a look, we should have some nice big font sizes everywhere, except, that's really small. Let's just go take a look. I forgot to put rem here. 4.5, nothing will not work. So we'll have a nice big font size at large screen sizes, but when we get to the smaller ones, you can see it's automatically adjusting when I change my screen size. And if we come lower down on the site, again, we should see those titles get bigger and smaller automatically with our media queries. So that is really, really cool. One of the things I love about custom properties, they do take a little bit more time to actually set up, but then once you're using things and creating things, man, it can just go so much faster. So I think we're going to end this one here. We're going to skip over the header and the navigation for now. We're going to come back to that in a little bit, because for now I just want to start doing the general typography bit for our section titles and subtitles, and then we'll sort of go through the site a little bit from there. All right, so as I mentioned, we're going to do a little bit more typography here. We're going to have our section title. We'll give this a little bit of styling, which at the moment, I'm not sure if we need to do much on it. And we're going to have our section subtitle. I'm going to start with the subtitle because there's a bit more of an, I'm going to play with that first and then go back into the other one to modify it a little bit. So our subtitle here is going to have a margin of 0 just because I think it makes our life a lot easier, because remember, we didn't do it as an H3. This is actually a paragraph, and because it's a paragraph, the font size on it we do have to modify. So the font size will be my var font size H3. And you can, again, start seeing where these variables can be handy. You don't have to remember the pixel value. You don't have to worry about the media queries or anything like that. It just is going to work. And then we had our section subtitle intro. We also had the section subtitle about that had similar styling on them, or they both had a background color on them of the var color accent. And the font family for both of those will be my var font family secondary. They're probably going to need a little bit of padding on them, but we'll come back to the padding in a little bit. We're going to have to play and modify a lot on these as time goes, just to get them to line up properly in the spaces. Let's just go take a look and see. I think that's working out pretty nicely, actually, with how it is right now. I'm actually really happy with it. I'm just going to play with the spacing on it a little bit just to see, because I think it's a little bit tight compared to what the original design was, but it's not too bad. You can see here the comma is actually touching that. So I think what we'll do is on my section title, we'll give it a little bit of a margin bottom of like 0.25 em. That'll probably be enough to push it off, especially because it's a large font size. I always do margins and padding on my text using ems. I think it's the best thing. It's relative to the font size that way, and you can sort of work with it. So I think that's really, really cool and handy. Here, since we're dealing with our section titles and everything, I like to keep all my typography together, which is why I'm working this way. I'm going to say the font family should be my font, not my font family, sorry, my font weight on this one should be the regular, which is awesome, except this obviously shouldn't be, because that should have a strong on it. Let me just double check. Did I put that? I do have that on there. So let's go and fix that, since this should be saying strong. Typography. I'm just going to do it up here. I know it's sort of a typography, but strong, it's a bit of a generic thing. Font weight is var font weight bold. There we go. So we have that working. Now, the question is, I'm going to cheat a little bit. This isn't something I normally do or very often do, but I'm going to actually take this and say that the strong tag that's nested in there is display block, just so the Jane Smith always ends up on its own line instead of sometimes being on a different line like that. So I'm not a big fan of using compound selectors, but every now and then, once you know the rules, you're allowed to break them sometimes. So this is one of those times where I think it is perfectly fine to go in there and break it. The font size on this does look a little bit smaller than what the original design called for, so I might play with that, but we'll play around with the overall look, and if we still find that it's too small, maybe we could even change both of them to be the H2 size instead. Anyway, we'll see. We'll come back to that once the design is starting to come together a little bit. But looking at the small screen sizes, honestly, we're getting close already to what we need. There's not a ton of work that needs to be done at the small screens to get everything here to work. Obviously, these need some fixing up. And overall, there is some work to be done, but we are getting close. So what we're going to do is we're going to end this video here, and then in the next video, we are going to go in and set up the grid for this and make this work at both small and large screens. Now, I know you might be wondering why we're not doing the navigation first, but I'm going to come back to the navigation at the end and set that whole thing up, because we're going to have to get into a little bit of JavaScript and stuff to get that working. So I'd rather just stick to CSS for now, finish everything else, come back, style that, and then add the JavaScript right at the very end. So here, what we can do is let's set up a bit of a comment. So we'll say intro section, and we can start styling it up. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a position of relative. I'm not sure, but I think we're going to have some absolute positioning coming onto here. So I'm doing that as a bit of a precursor for that. Let's see, now we have, I'm actually going to say, we're going to turn this off, but let's just say, for now, I'm going to say nav has a display of none, just so it doesn't really get in the way too much. We'll keep our logo at the top, even though that does have to be smaller. But at least it'll give us a bit of a better idea of how everything is going to be looking once everything comes together at these smaller screen sizes. And I think actually I'm going to come up before we do anything else. Typography, I'm going to come here to like my general stylings, and I'm actually going to give my sections a generic padding. So padding will be, let's start with say 5em top and bottom, 2em left and right. The 2em might be a little bit big at small screen sizes, but we're going to start with that and see what it does. The main idea here is it's just going to keep things from touching the side of the screen when we don't want them to. So I'm actually not minding that, except the line height here. I'm actually going to shrink that down to 1 because I find the spacing on the lines was way too much. I think that is looking not bad, but obviously we need to add a little bit of spacing on the bottom of that because it is stuck onto there. So that is my section title, my subtitle. They're both going to need the spacing. So I think we can add our margin bottom here of 1em just to give us that nice little space. And at small screen sizes, I don't mind that too much. This does need a box shadow. We're going to come and do that afterward though. And where we do need this to change is once we get into our media queries here and when we start changing this for the larger screen sizes. I know I set the fonts to change it 800. I'm going to set this to change it 600 though. My stance on when media queries should come in, 600. As again, this is a bit of a generic thing. Your text might change, your images might change. You're going to play around with it a little bit. So I'm doing 600 is a bit of a generic one. I like designing from 300 and up, 600 and up, and 900 and up tend to be some nice generic ones instead of focusing on specific devices. But your mileage may vary with all of that. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually, we're going to define a display of grid on here, and we're going to set up a grid. I do like using, let's say grid template areas. I love my grid template areas. So in my grid template areas here, I am going to go on another line just because I find it makes it a little bit easier. And we're going to say title. And then on the next one, we're going to do an image and subtitle like that. And then we can say my grid template columns will be, I'm going to do a min content. So it's going to try and shrink that down as small as it can. We're going to set our image up so hopefully that doesn't actually disappear because that is for my image. And then my text will be set to max content to try and make that as big as possible. Now, obviously, we need to get things actually lining up where we want them to be because that's going to cause a little bit of an issue. So let's start off with my intro image, which I didn't actually put a class on. So here we can do class is equal to intro image. That will help. Sorry about that. So our intro image will be our grid area of IMG. And as I was a little worried about, that means my image is actually going to disappear. So let's fix that. We're going to actually say this has a min width of 250 pixels, just so it never disappears. And that's much better, but now my text is stuck to the side there, which is no good. So here we can do a grid column gap of 1em just to create that spacing that we want. And the subtitle we might not actually be able to use, but we're going to leave it there anyway. So that is nice. The only problem is we don't want it to be stuck there. We want it to stick in the middle. So I am also going to do a width of min content, which should shrink it down and then give it a margin of 0 auto. And so it should match the width of the whole div will, or the section will match the content that's inside of it, and the zero auto will keep it nice and centered when we're at these bigger screen sizes. So we can see that it is working nicely, but the front end dev, we have a bit of a problem where it is stretching there. So that was my section, subtitle, intro. Now, this is where things get a little dicey, because should this be here or should it be up in the typography section? I'm going to argue that it should be here because we're pertaining to layout right now or not pertaining to the type. If you think it makes more sense to leave it all in one spot together, I completely agree with you, and you can go ahead and do that. But because we're only worrying about layout right now, I'm keeping this part of this stuff down here where the rest of my intro layout content is. So for this, I'm going to start by doing an align self as start, which will stop it from stretching down, and it sort of fits into that area a little bit nicer. And I'm also now going to say that my grid column is -1/1, which will have it stretch the whole length and going all the way across, which is great, except now it's going underneath this because by default, they don't want to overlap. So to get around that overlapping issue, we can, or not the lack of wanting to overlap, I should say, we can do a grid row of 2 because we have our grid row of 1, our grid row 1 line, and then our 2. So it's there. Now our text is there. We want it on this side. So we can also do a simple text align to the right. I know we said we're pertaining to layout more, but at least there we go. It is starting to work and starting to come together. Now, my original plan to get this to go underneath like that was actually to use absolute positioning, because absolute positioning and the grid work fantastically together. But I think we can actually pull this off with relative positioning, and of having to avoid absolute positioning sometimes is a good idea. So what I'm thinking is on here we can do a position of relative, but my left is going to be -2m. And if we go take a look, see that's pulled this over. So that's giving us that space here. And maybe that's a little bit too much. So maybe we can do like a -1.5. And I think that'd be probably a little bit closer. Perfect. The only problem now is the width won't match. And this is where if you did use absolute positioning, you can say left -1.5 and you can say right and 0 and it's going to line up perfectly. We can't actually do that when we're using relative positioning. But we can do a little cheat, and I love doing things. Well, it's not a cheat. It's what these types of things were made for. So my width is going to be a calc of 100% plus 1.5m. And that should make the width be 100% plus 1.5m, and then it lines everything up nice and perfectly. So I think that's really cool and fun. I love doing stuff like that. So that's working. I think it's pretty straightforward too by having these together, and usually I have width near the top, but I do think it means like keeping these together makes them work better. And I am going to increase the padding a little bit, but I think we're going to want to do this on both of them. So let's just come all the way up here. We set a background on that. So I think I'm going to set my padding here. Padding of say 0.25m, 1m. Let's just see what that ends up looking like. Yeah, perfect. So I like that. Now, it's not lining up like my design where I matched that, but obviously if the title changed, I did front end dev, but say you wanted a different title, that could actually break it a little bit where it's actually going to go underneath the image a tad. So I think instead of changing that, if you wanted to play with the font size, you could very easily play with it, but I'm going to keep it as this smaller font size because it's going to give people more room if they had a longer title without breaking it. I think that where the media queries here are would prevent someone, unless you had a really long title, from this becoming an issue. So the last thing for now is we're going to stick it underneath and add that box shadow onto there. So let's go and take a look at how we can do that. Putting it underneath is going to be easy enough. I'm actually just going to come on the image and give this a position of relative, and that should be enough, but we can also, just to be safe, give it a Z index of 2, just so we know that it's coming up on top. And now for the box shadow, I like doing complicated box shadows because they can be a little bit nicer looking. So what I'm actually going to do, because we do want to use it in more than one place, I'm going to come up to my custom properties here and create my box shadow here. So I'm just going to call it BS, which could be a number of things, but it will be box shadow. And we're going to do one, it's going to be a small offset. So 0.25m, 0.25m. So that's to the right and down just a little bit. The blur will be a 0.75m, and we'll give it an RGBA of 000 0.25. Except that should be our GB. That should be good. So now we can come down and put it on our image, but we don't want to put it on this one. We want to put it on our image at all sizes. So I'm going to do my intro image out here and give it a box shadow of var BS. And that should start by giving us a nice subtle shadow. I think just like that, it looks good. But I like always coming in and adding a little bit to my shadows. So I'm going to do a comma, and then I'm going to break this onto a second line. But if you don't want to, you don't have to. It can continue right after. The shadows layer on it. So if you're doing more than one shadow, you can always start with the bigger one first and then like smaller ones after, because it's coming sort of closer to us, if that makes sense. The blur will be smaller as well, and an RGBA of 0.15. And don't forget your M here. So the difference between the two of them will be very subtle, but it just gives you a bit of a darker shadow that's a little bit closer. It's layering things, and then the next one's a little bit lighter, so it can be a little bit more realistic. If you look at things like material design, they often have 2-3 shadows deep, just to help increase the realism of their shadows. So there we go. I think that's looking really, really cool. It never gets too big, too wide, but that's all right. And then, as we go, so it's a nice little focus point. It shrinks down and then it shrinks once again. And this bar going all the way across like that, to me, works well at the small screen sizes. But if that's bugging you and you really don't want it to do that, we could come in at our small screen sizes if this was just a display inline block. Because then what that's going to do is it's going to set the width to be the size of itself. So then here we can see it's fitting exactly itself. And then at the big screen sizes, it will jump back to what we had. So you know what? I think for the small screen sizes, I'm going to leave it like that. But if you'd rather adjust that to something a little bit different, by all means, if you rather that bigger bar that matches the image size, that is perfectly fine too. That is it for this one. In the next video, we will jump down into this next what I do section and style that one up. It should not be too much work, and then we can keep on going. We'll style our button at the same time, since we haven't done that yet. All right, here we go with the services or what I do section, which isn't too complicated to do. If we go and look at it right now, it's not going to be all in place yet, but we can see that our text is sort of coming there. And when we get to the bigger screen sizes, we just need to break across on all three. So let's start by setting the colors up first. So my services, I'm going to give this a background color of, we'll do our var color dark, and a color of var color light. To start things off, I know we have a background image on this as well. I always set a background color and then a background image afterward, because if the background image ever fails for one reason or another, it's always good to be able to get them. So we want to go back a step, go to our images, and then it was called services bg.jpg. And we can see, there we go, it is coming in. With that, going to do a background size of cover to make sure that it never repeats itself. And I think that should be pretty good, actually. We can see that it is coming in nicely, just like that. It is a little bit bright. And so if you ever, you want to, we could always do a background blend mode on here too of multiply, just to help darken the whole thing up. We're sort of losing the image maybe more than we want, so we could play with the background color or the image. I'm actually going to leave it like this, because to me, it's more important that the text is super readable, even if it means the background's a bit darker than what you intended it to be. Whereas here you can see it was like in that example that I had. So it's up to you whether you want this multiply on or off. You can play with the color. This is where you could say, instead of color dark, we do color accent. And then you'd actually get like that green color that's coming through. So it really depends on the layout that you're doing. It could be a fun thing to play around with. But I'm going to, I think, leave it like this for now. And again, the reason we put both the color and the image is just in case the image doesn't load for some reason, at least people will still be able to read the text. I also always do my background color and image and size if I need it as longhand instead of the shorthand property, because the background shorthand drives me crazy. I like shorthands that save me time, and I can put them in any order, and the background one I tend to find breaks things more than anything else. I'm also going to throw a text align center on this whole thing, because everything on this on small and large screens is centered. So that is great. The section title services was a little bit unique. So I'm going to stay here for now, section title services, because the color of it is my var color accent. We're going to need a bit more of a margin on it, I think. But before we do the margin, I'm just going to give it a position of relative, because I have the pseudo element that I want to put on it. So it's my, let's just copy this because it's a little bit faster, and my after. So that's, I'm going to use my pseudo element just to create this light line that's coming in right there. So it's nice and easy to do. We just have to do a content. So if you don't know too much about custom properties, I was going to say about pseudo elements is you need to give them a content or they will not appear, and either display block or position. I'm going to say display block this time, width of about 25%, a height of 1 pixel, margin of 0.5 em, so it's going to give us some space on the top, auto left and right, and 1 em on the bottom. And this is why I didn't put any margins on my title itself, because I think most of the spacing that I need I can have my pseudo element creating for me. And of course we need a background on here. We could do two different things. We'll do my var color light though. The other option you could have, if you always want it to match the title of the services, is we could put that to current color. So if it's current color, it's going to match this color that we have on the text there. I don't know if I like that 25%. We might set a set width on that instead of like 3em, just to have a nice little set width. So now it's green and green. I prefer that actually if it's white, so I'm going to switch that back. But if you do current color, whatever color you decide to put for this, this will automatically match no matter what. Var color light, I think, is going to look a little bit nicer. And we're going to lower the opacity on it to opacity of 0.5, just so it doesn't stand out as much. It should be a little design element. Maybe even a 0.25 will be enough. It should be more of a design element than something that's really in our face that we can really see. So there we go. I think that is good. Maybe it could be a little smaller, but I think it looks nice how it is. So I'm going to leave it just like that. Let's move it to 2. As I said that, now into the smaller screens, it was a little bit too big. So there we go. So at the small screens, it is done. We still have to style our button, but the layout for this part is completely done. And if we go up to the bigger screens, well, that's where we need it to break into multiple columns. So what I'm going to do is we're going to start with a media query. We might have to come back up. Min width, I'm going to do my 800 pixels again. And let's do my services. Gets a display. Oops, display of flex on it. So that should make 3 columns right away. I'm also going to give it a max width though. Max width of say 1000 pixels and a margin of 0 auto. The 1000 pixel max width that I'm putting on that is a bit of a guess at this stage, but I think it's going to work nicely. Where I can't even get to there based on my screen size right now, but it's just going to stop things from, oh, it is. We're getting there right around there, which is pretty much perfect. The only thing is we do need a little bit of space between our individual services. So this is where we could say that if I have a service plus a service, we can have a margin left. I'm trying to think, service plus a service, margin, yeah, left was right, of say 2em. I'm also going to, I'm wondering if they should have a width on them or not. Let's just set that like that. And let's just go take a look. There we go. We have a bit of space between them now. They're no longer touching. If you don't know about this, the plus combinator that I did, it's saying the sibling. So it's going to look at this one and it's going to look at this one. So it's ignoring this, but it goes sort of the sibling. So was there a sibling? Yes, it's adding a margin on the left. And then this one is the sibling, so it's adding the margin to the left of that. And then there's no more, so it's not adding it to any other ones. And this one is not getting a margin left, so it doesn't create this giant space on the left side of that we don't want to have. So that is perfection. And then it's sort of like adding a gap. When with the grid, we have gap, flexbox, gap is coming. It's in Firefox, but it's not in the other ones yet. So we're sort of stuck doing it like that. So that's working well. I think on small screens, this is working, but then when we get to these bigger screens, like here, the length of the text is a little bit too long. So what I am going to do is here, before we get to our media query, I'm going to say the individual service also has a max width of, we'll try 500. And with that, we'll need a margin of 0 auto to keep it centered as well. And if we go take a look now, I think that's a little bit better. It's just stopping it from getting too big, and it shouldn't affect it at this size because they're never actually getting bigger than 500 pixels. So there we go. I think that's working nicely, and then click, it's working nicely there. So I'm just going to worry about my button now. And this is, you do have the choice a little bit here. I'm going to leave this here because again, it's mostly dealing with layout, but I guess this one you could argue should be up with my typography. I'm a little weird how I guess I work in that. I'm wondering if I should group it all together. But I am going to go all the way up to here for my .btn. So usually for my buttons, I usually have designs that have more than one button. So I'm just going to write buttons. But in this case, I only had the one button to style up. So all my styles are going on here. Inline block. Padding can be 0.5em, 1.5em, which sort of gives it its size. The background will be my var color accent. The color itself, so the text color, can be color dark. Text decoration, since it can be set on a link, will be none. I'm also going to do cursor pointer. This is in case you ever do put it on a button instead of putting it on a link. That's important to have. Font size, I'm going to shrink it down a little bit because I think it was a bit too big. I don't have a custom property for that. We're just going to shrink it here. We can do a text transform uppercase, so it's always capitalized. If you ever do all cap text, it can help letter spacing, to do letter spacing on something to help spread them out a little bit. Speaking of typography, font weight, I think I use my var font weight bold on this. And then we can also look at my transition. I'm going to do a transition on my transforms, 200 milliseconds ease in out. And the reason, in ease in out. The reason that I'm putting that on there is because on my BTN hover, I want to put a transform of scale 1.1. So when we do hover on my button, it will get bigger and smaller. The only thing is my transition, transform, not transfrom. And there we go. Now, there we go. Now we can have a nice little transition when we hover on top of it. But there is another thing I want to do. And I'm actually going to do this on all my links and on everything, really. So where should we put it? We'll do it right here before my buttons. I'm going to say everything when it has a focus state is going to get an outline on it. Outline will become, let's say, 3 pixels, solid, var, color, accent. So this is going to apply to my button, but it's also going to apply to other things. Now, the only problem with it is it doesn't really jump out at you when you tab onto that, right? So you can see if I'm here and I tab, it gets a little bit bigger. So to really make sure people can notice it, I'm also going to do an outline offset of, say, 3 pixels. So if I'm here and I tab, it highlights that I am tabbed on it. So it's not a hover state. It's really just for my focus state, which is a little bit different. Grabs the attention a little bit more than my hover might do. So that is what I'm going to do for all my focus. This will be on my links. It'll be on other things. We're going to leave it just like that because I'll talk more about it once we start getting to our links and a few other things. I'm going to come down one last detail though. What I don't like now is how close everything is, like how close my button is to everything else there. I could add a margin top to my button, but I do want to think that maybe this would be something that would be working in like the real world or on other things. And actually here, I think I wrote see my work. We're going to change my button a little bit. I did 1.5. Let's make this like 2.5 because my button was quite a bit wider. So I think that'll work better for my padding. And I'm going to come to my section. How's it looking at the small screen? It's probably the same problem. It's a little bit, it's way too tight. So on my dot services, plural, margin bottom of 2em. Actually, I'm going to bring that up to like 4em because I had quite a bit of space. It balances out between this space and this space. I think that looks a lot better. And so it's looking a lot better. The only problem is my margin's disappearing here because over here I did a margin 0 auto. So I'm going to have to change that to be a margin left of auto and a margin right of auto, just so it doesn't overwrite that margin bottom along the way. And so it's always sitting at that same spacing. Super duper. That section is all done. I'm super happy with it. And so now we can move on to this next section. Okay, so we're going to be doing the Who I Am or the About Me section in this video, and we're going to be using grid once again for it, a little bit like we did up above. It's going to be a super similar grid, but we're flipping it around a little bit because if you remember when we did that, the image is on the left side and is smaller, and then this area will be quite a bit wider than the other one, and obviously the image is on the other side, but that doesn't change things up too much. So let's start off just with me about me. I think what we're going to do for now is just give it a max width of 1,000 pixels like we did on the section above. We'll give it a margin of 0 auto to keep it that centered. And let's go take a look to see if that's had any impact on things. So at the small screen sizes, we should be okay. And then when we get to the larger one, at one point, it does max out on the size. So the line length is quite long now, but since we're going to be making that into 2 columns, I think it will look perfection. So let's take a look. It's right around here. Now, it depends on the size of the image we use, obviously, on how that's going to work out. But we want to build in our media query. I think we'll do the same that we did previously. So add media. Or I just realized I did 800 pixels for the services. I'm going to go with a 600 again for here. So 600 pixels. I'd said in another video that I usually do like a 6.9. In this case, the 800 just seemed to work better as a breakpoint for when this would switch over than 900. If you prefer things all switching at similar levels, you could definitely bring that up to a 9. I just find it we're sort of wasting screen space. We can go to 3 columns around the 800 pixel point. Some people like having really set media queries. I don't use a lot of media queries. I sort of do 1 per section, maybe 2 per section. So you can also deal with really big screens. Sometimes you need to make some changes. But I like having media queries that deal with my layout more than I have media queries that just fill in with the set sizes. I think it makes a lot more sense. And I think this one's, once we get to about the 600 pixels, we can break that off into the 2 columns and it will work really, really well. All right, so in this media query, I'm going to set my about me, and we're going to set up a display grid on here and my grid template columns. And my grid template columns, we're going to do a 1FR for the main area. And then for my image itself, I think for the moment, I'm going to lock it in at like 200 pixels. Maybe we'll play around with that number a little bit, but 200, I think will match pretty well with the design that we have. It's going to let the image be bigger than that at different screen sizes. It could be a number that you change for your own layout, depending on the image that you want to use. And I am using pixels here, and I am actually using pixels in my media queries as well, as you might have noticed. You might be wondering about that. Some people try to avoid pixels. I do avoid them in my font sizes, as you've seen. I use my rems. I use rems for font sizes because it is, if a user has set a custom font size for their browser because they want things to be bigger, it does allow that to work. Things zoom in and out nicely. But there's nothing wrong with using, say, a pixel value on a max width. It's not going to cause any issues. We're going to need a gap on that, but let's set things up a little bit. Now, on the last one, I did use my grid template areas, but let's go. Let's just take a look quickly here at how we set it up. So we have about me. I didn't give my image a class, which was what I was thinking. I'm going to do about me image because we do want to start by placing that one where we want about me image. And that one I'm going to give a grid row. Last time I did it with grid template areas. This time I'm going to say 1/-1, which means it's starting at the top and ending at the last row automatically. And my grid column will start at grid at column line 2. So that should fix that up. We also want we want the section title about is going to be a grid column of 1. And actually, we can do that for my, that was my subtitle. We're going to do the same thing for our section title. So we have both of those. Let's hit save. I just have a little typo down here. Let's change that to be semicolon and go and check it out. Title is okay. See, this is where grid areas sometimes make things easier and why I like to use them in general. Once again, even though we're not going to be able to use a grid area for this one since it's overlapping, it could overall be a little bit easier than using line numbers. It also makes it easier as a template for people to change things around. So why don't we set that up with some grid template areas. So we can have our title and the image next to it. Again, I like putting these all in the next line and indenting it just because it makes it easier to overlap each one. The next would be my subtitle and my image. And the last one would be my text and my image. I'm going to go back on this actually, and we can say that this is my grid area title. The image will be grid area image, and it really does make it a lot easier to manipulate this if you wanted to change your grid just by changing how the grid template areas are set up. We can already see that it's falling pretty much in line with what we want it to be doing, which is awesome. And at the small screen sizes, it's working out nicely. And then when we get to the larger screen, it breaks into the two columns. A little bit more work to be done still on this, but I'm going to also add in here a grid column gap. I don't want to create any gaps on my rows, so my grid column gap, we'll go with like a 2em maybe this time. A 1em could work nicely, but I like keeping a bit of space on there. So that looks good. On my image, I'm also going to add, we can come actually up to here, about me image. We can add our box shadow var. This is where it becomes nice. The first time you set up a custom property, it can seem like a waste of time, but as soon as you reuse it, it is super handy. So there we go. My section subtitle about, we're going to want to give that a grid column of 1 over -1. So it goes from one side all the way over to the other side. And grid row of 2 to keep it in the right place. So there we go. Now it is going underneath my image right there. So this one's going to take a little bit more playing around with in how we're going to set it up to make sure that text doesn't go underneath the image like it is doing now. It's not terribly complicated. And if you do have an issue up top with how that's working, you could always use the same method up there to fix it. So what we're going to do, first, let's give it a position of relative. And we can do this very similar to what we did last time. I'm going to give it a left of -2em, and I'm going to give it a width of calc 100%. In this case, I'm actually going to do a +4em, and that's the reason I'm doing it like this is because I do want it to stick out both sides a little bit. Maybe that's going to be a bit too much. It works here, but it's going to cause some issues there. But we do want it to stick out both sides. So by doing it this way, it's going to stick out both sides, which is cool, but we will have to build in the padding to fix that. So padding can be, I'm just trying to think, 2em for both sides. So padding left of 2em, but then the padding right, actually, padding left will be 2em. The padding right, I'm going to do calc of 200 pixels plus 2em. And what that's going to do is make it so my text, this is all padding on this side now. So the text will never touch the image. You can see it's getting really close, but it's not clicking. Now we have the 2em there. I'm actually going to boost this up to 4em. And what that's doing, so now when we look at it, what it's doing is it's setting it up so the text can never go under the image. So on this side, we have our 2em. Then we have the 200 in pixels, and then I had a grid gap of 2em. So I'm pretty much the 4 is the inclusion of both of those. So the text will never, once we set it up, will never go underneath that image. So that can come in handy if you go to a smaller screen size and we get this where it's breaking over on 2 lines, or if you have a long title. If you have a short title, it's not going to change anything in the long run. My only issue is that this isn't really working right now with how we've set things up. So what I'm actually going to do for now is my padding left, my left will be -1. This is going to be +2. And this is going to go back down to 1. I think we can leave that one. If we really wanted to, we could change that number to a 3. But I think I'll leave it as a 4 because I don't think it's going to get in the way. And that's just going to make sure it is sticking out. But the reason I put the padding on that side is just so all the text is actually lining up. If you don't like that and you don't like the fact that it's sticking off, obviously you can play around with that number a little bit. But at least now it's working better at the other sizes with the 1em instead of the 2em. because we have 2M of padding, it gives it room that it can still live inside without causing any overflow. And then obviously at the small screens, we don't have anything to worry about. So that is looking pretty good. But what I want to do is one last thing. We do want to reposition it on top of my image. I'm just going to come here onto my image and give this a position relative, which should fix the issue. But once again, I'll give it a Z index of 2 just to make sure that it's always on top. And there we go. So it should be working out great. The thing that's nice about this is because of the way the image is going to be calculated, like if we had longer text here, it's just going to keep flowing down. It's not going to actually break anything. It's not going to cause any issues. But if you had really short text, it's also going to work and shouldn't have any issues. And that's one of the reasons why I included this inside one div. If you remember when we set it up, we did that as an About Me body. And it's important that it's in this body because it's only going to create one row. So if any additional content needs to go inside this body, if you include extra paragraphs that are outside of that, it's going to keep creating new rows in the grid, and it could actually impact the way that the image is working. I don't know if it would actually break anything, but pretty much all the content itself will have to go inside of that body area just to ensure that it's one row so nothing breaks along the way. And that is that area all wrapped up. So in the next video, we will move on to the next one. So we're going to be doing the portfolio section. We're going to be using grid for this one as well. And one nice thing with it is in this example image, I only have 6 pieces. In the code I have 10. And it's one that should be flexible and be able to grow or shrink depending on the screen size. And we shouldn't need any media queries for this one. This is one of my favorite functions of grid. So if we just look really fast at our markup before we start doing anything, and we look at how we did this, we have the basic my work area, and then we have the portfolio itself. And in each portfolio, we have a portfolio item and a portfolio image. So if I come back to here and let's create a new section. So that was my work. We do want to give this the background color of var color dark. I will just say color is var color light, even though the title will have to change colors. I did forget to put this, so a selection of my range of work. Sorry about that. So there we go. It is there. We can also just throw, to make our life as easy as possible, we can throw a text align center on here as well, because that's the only text that we will have. Now, obviously, the colors aren't quite matching, and this one should be bold on the bottom. So I think what I didn't do was give these their own classes. And just by doing that, I can say that I don't really need the first one, but my section subtitle work color can be my var color accent, and my font weight can be var font weight bold. Now these are really just typography. There's nothing but layout really on these. I will add a margin bottom to it, margin bottom of 1em, just to help with the spacing a little bit. Maybe we can bring that up to 2 actually. This one, if you wanted to argue because it's all typography and it has nothing to do with layout purposes, it could come up and live with all of this stuff here. And so just like I did with these ones, I think I'll leave that one right there. For my portfolio now, we're going to do a display of grid on here. We're going to do a grid template columns, and this is where the fun starts. On my grid template columns, what we're going to do is a repeat. So if you don't know repeat, say we do 3, 1 fr, it's automatically going to make 3 columns. So if we go and look, we have 3 columns there, and it's working out really nicely. And if I bring that up to a 4, it's automatically going to make 4 columns. And right away, that makes for something that's really easily interchangeable, which is really, really cool. But what's even better here is auto fit in a case like this. But the thing with auto fit is you can't just use something like 1fr. You have to use a min max, which sets a minimum and maximum value. The minimum is really up to you. I'm going to say it's about 300 pixels and a maximum of 1fr. So it'll grow to the size that it needs to. So it means each grid has a minimum size of 300 pixels, but if it has room to get bigger, it will. So let's go take a look and see what this does. So it means at larger screens, it works. But when we get to smaller sizes, it's automatically gone down to 2. And then at even smaller sizes, it will automatically drop down to 1. And if you had very big screen sizes, it would just keep growing and growing and growing. So there is a chance you might also want to set a max width on this, but it really depends on you. I'm going to leave this off. But if you wanted to have a maximum width just to prevent it from being this one long string that goes all the way across, it is a choice. If you set a max width, also just give it a margin of 0 auto to keep it centered on the screen. But I think it's going to work perfectly like this. It does mean, because I have 10 items, that the one downside is sometimes you will end up with like one item that's left over at the end. Whereas, now it's working really well with 9 items, but if I made it 9 and then it goes down to the 2-column layout, well, then you'd have one empty one here. So it really depends on the setup and how you want to do all of that. But overall, very simple, nice and easy to do, and it very, very flexible. Depending, you could have 100 pieces in there, you could have 5 pieces in there, it's always going to work. So that should work out nicely. All right, so now what we want to do is add a little bit of a hover effect. So the first thing I'm actually going to do is take my portfolio item. And on my portfolio item, we're going to give it a background of our accent. And you might be going, well, what's the point of that? We're not going to see it. And you're right, you will not see them. My portfolio items obviously have an image on top, so we will not see that color. But we're going to play around with that a little bit now. So what we're going to say is that my portfolio image, we're going to set a transition on this. So transition, we're going to transition 2 things, a transform. We're going to do this one kind of slowly. So we'll do 750 milliseconds, which is pretty slow for me. And we'll do a cubic Bezier because we're going to be fancy here. And a really nice one to start with is a 0.5, not 0.5, a 0.5, comma 0, comma 0.5, comma 1. It's a really nice curve, very similar to an ease in out, but a little bit more subtle. So that will be for my transforms. And then I'm going to do a actually, we can put each one of these on a line because we're going to have 2 different ones. So after this one, we're going to put a comma, and we're also going to transform the opacity of it. This one will be a little bit faster. So the opacity will transform over 250 milliseconds, and this one will just be a linear transition. And so with that done, I'm just going to copy my portfolio image, and we can come down into here, and my portfolio image hover. We want to give this a transform on the scale. We'll go up to like a 1.2. We're going to come back and forth a little bit once we've set this up. We'll change the opacity to like a 0.75. And so let's go and take a look at what that's going to do. So now we can see that when I hover on top, the green color is going to show through, and it's going to grow and shrink. But obviously that looks kind of weird, right? That it's expanding like that. We don't really want it to do that because that looks super awkward. So on my portfolio item, I'm also going to do an overflow of hidden. So now if we go take a look, when it grows, it's just growing within that box and it won't overflow out. So I think that makes a lot more sense and works much, much better. And we get that little color coming through on each one. You could play with the opacity a little bit if you wanted it to more of the green to come through. We could definitely have more of the green come through. And because these are links, we will be able to tab onto them, but you can see it is doing that outline that I wanted it to have. So if we want the tabbing to have a similar type of effect, we can't actually focus on the image itself. We can only focus on the link and then have the image inside of it be modified. So what we can do is we can keep the same effect on here, but for this one, it's going to be for my portfolio item. So if my portfolio item comes into focus, we want the embedded, the child, the portfolio image, so the child there, to change. So now if we come and take a look, when I tab on, you can see that the tab is also affecting it. Now the problem is where the outline is, does look kind of awkward. Now, if we want to fix that issue with the focus, we will actually have to change one other thing here, and that would be my portfolio item focus. Just on when that focuses, the position will become relative, and the Z index for that will become a 2. We can't do that on the image itself because the image is inside of the portfolio item. So by doing this, it should, there we go, pops out in front, and the focus, the like green bar, If you don't want the green bar, you could obviously turn it off as well, but I'm going to be keeping that. It's going to be very consistent through my whole site in having that, so I don't mind that it's there. But if you don't really like it, for this one, because it's obviously jumping so much when we hover on top, I think it would be okay to get rid of it. But for all the other ones, I would keep some sort of focus state. So that's it for the portfolio area here. We will design a page for our portfolio items as well, but we're not there yet. Let's finish this page off first. All right, for this part of the site, we're going to be doing the footer, which is really straightforward, but we're going to be using Font Awesome for it. If you've used Font Awesome before, you can skip this video. In the next one, we're going to be really setting it up and styling things. But if you've never used Font Awesome before, it's really easy to use. You can go to their website, which is fontawesome.com. There's a link to it in the description of this Scrimba as well. And what you want to do is you want to click on the icons. This is because I've already set it up to be using their icons. If you're using it on your own site and you haven't got that link yet, you can click on the start for free instead. Give them your email address. They're going to send you the link to be using. But then in this case, we're just going to be clicking on icons, and it's going to bring you to their list of icons. Now, for Font Awesome, there is a free set of icons available and a paid set. The free ones, there's still thousands to choose from, but if you are willing to pay for more, you get access to up to 7,000 of them, which is a lot of icons that you can use. In this case, we're only going to be using the brands icons. So there you can see on the left side, you can sort by the different styles of them. And the solid are the only ones that are available for free in general. But if you do want to get the brands, you'll click on that. It's only going to bring up the brands. Or often what's actually easier to do is just to search for the brand that you want. So if you wanted Twitter or GitHub or whatever else, Dribble, Facebook, anything you want, just run a search for it and you should be able to find it. Once you found the icon you want, you can click on it. So you just literally click on the icon. It will bring you to a page that looks like this. And all you need to do is click on that where it shows you how you're going to grab it. And the cool thing with that is it should automatically copy it from copy it from there, and then you can paste it directly into your site. So I'm going to do that really fast just to show you how it works. And now, obviously, you can't see me over on their site. But what I'm going to do is we'll come down all the way to the footer here. I have my list items. Let's clean this up a little bit to make it a little bit easier to read. There we go. So that's a little bit easier to read. We can get rid of our A, our B, our C, and our D. And here inside my link, so I'm in between the opening and closing A, I'm going to paste this in. And just to make it easier to read, we'll put that on its own line as well. Just like that. So there we have my fab. So it's Font Awesome brand, FAB, and then Font Awesome, and it's the code pen. So if we go and take a look, all the way down at the bottom, it has changed it over to the code pen icon. So I'm quickly going to bring in the other ones. And now you can see that they are all there and that they're all working. So that is really cool. It's a really nice, easy way to bring social icons into your site if ever you need them. And you're going to see in the next video when we style this up, it works just like a font. So all we need to do is set a font size, a font family, all of that stuff. And our icons should be coming in and everything will be looking really, really awesome. So we'll see in that video where we style this up. All right, so we can start styling up our footer now. So let's create a little comment to say we're in our footer. One thing I'm going to do right away is actually come and give this a class. I know you might say it's redundant of footer, just like I did on my nav. So just because I generally like styling everything as much as possible with a class on it. So I'll put a background on this. Now I'm going to do a 111 here. I'm not going to use a custom variable. It's just almost black, not pure black, but almost black. So the footer will always be dark. If you want to change it, obviously we can change that individually. But for the color here, I will use my accent color for the text. My text align will be centered, and we'll put a little bit of padding on this, not as big as on our other sections, but something like that should work out nicely. The other thing I want to do on my footer is I obviously want the color of my links to come through. So I could choose my footer link and my social list links individually. But this is one of those times where I might just do something like this and say the color is inherent for everything, any link that might end up in my footer, so I don't have to worry about it at all. If we go take a look, we can see now that everything is styled up. It has the colors we want on it. The layout obviously needs some fixing up, but we're getting there. Just realized, no, Jane Dev, that's okay. So footer A, that is good. The next thing I'm going to do is say my footer link hover, and my social. I'm going to give them both an opacity of like 0.7. So if we go and take a look at it now, we can see that when we're hovering on top, it just gives us a nice little subtle hover effect. And the reason we want to do that, if we tab on it, you can see it's actually really highlighting it. And you might be saying, well, that doesn't look as nice, or I want to keep that nice little subtle effect for tab navigation. But the reason I like having a focus state that's different, and this is something I've more recently changed, but it's when we tab through, we can see that it is working. It's really highlighting, but we don't know where it's going to bring us next. And if it's a really subtle effect where it's just this that's happening, you might not even realize when the page jumped down to select something. When we tab onto it, we don't always realize what's being selected if it's a little subtle effect like an opacity change. Whereas if there's a big box that's surrounding something, I do think it makes it a little bit more obvious what's happening. So that's one of the reasons I'm going to keep that focus state just like that. I think we're actually going to do two different things here on my footer links. We're going to do our color of inherit, but we're also going to say a text decoration of none, just to turn them off as a default. But then what we can also have is on my footer link hover, not list, footer link hover. If we want to, we can do a text decoration of underline just to bring it back on. So when we're off here, we don't see it, but it's a double little whammy just to make it a little bit more obvious that it is that we are interacting with it. I'm going to come up to here just because I like keeping my hover states sort of separate or underneath. So my footer link, we're also going to want to change the font size on this one. So the font size of this can become my variable font size, H3. So it'll be big, but not too big. And the font weight will also become my variable font weight bold. So now we can see that it is, I think, looking a little bit better. We can see that it's nice bold. It's a little bit bigger. So that is looking awesome. Let's come on to my social list now. For this one, we want a list style of none because we don't want the bullets. We want a display of flex, which is going to put them next to each other, and a justify content of center to put them right in the middle. And I'm also going to add a margin on this just to space it out a little bit, and padding of 0 because the default padding will make it off center. So let's go take a look, and there we go. It is looking all right, but obviously they're all jammed in and a little bit too close to one another. So we can come up and say that my social list items, I'm going to give them a bit of margin of 0 top and bottom, but we can add like a 0.5 em left and right. And on my social list links, I'm also going to give them a bit of padding of say 0.5 em, just so it makes it easier to press on them if you're using your finger or something like that. There is a bit of space around them that we can click on, so that makes that a little bit easier. And I think we can probably make them a little bit bigger as well. They're kind of tiny right now. So you know what? Maybe what we could do is actually move this. We can move that all the way up here just to my footer itself and say everything inside the footer should have that bigger font size on it. So there we go. It will boost the font size of those icons with it. And it's one of the nice things with Font Awesome. And I think that is looking really, really good and dandy. I'm super happy with that. Except I just realized one thing. I have a margin top and bottom coming on those, which means it's sort of setting things off. So my social list, margin top 0, 0. We want a margin bottom of 0 on the social list, just so it doesn't add empty space underneath for nothing. So now it should look a little bit more balanced overall. And there we have it. So we've got all the way to the bottom of the site. Now in the next video, we're going to come all the way back up to the top where we're going to be doing our navigation and getting that to work and getting this page all wrapped up. We will be breaking the navigation over a couple of videos because we will have to do a little bit of JavaScript for that as well. So if you remember way back when, I turned nav display none on just to get it out of our way. And obviously we don't want that. So I'm going to delete that so we can actually get started on this navigation and getting it working. Now, one of the reasons I left the navigation to the end is the navigation is a simple enough element, is often one of the ones that actually takes the most styling to set up and can sometimes be a little bit long to do, really. So the very first thing I'm going to do is just say my logo has a max width of, I'm going to say 150 pixels, but obviously you can modify that to your own. I might even say 100 pixels. And you can modify that to control the size of your logo. It also doesn't have to be a PNG. You can bring in an SVG, and that should work fantastically as well, and might even be a little bit better. So that is setting that up nicely. So on my header itself, we're going to set this up as a display of flex because we want that to be on the left and we want my button to shoot on over to the right. So on that display flex, we're also going to do a justify content space between, which will spread them out properly. And we're going to do a bit of padding on this of say 1em on all the sides, just so nothing is touching. Now that does mean at big screen sizes, the logo will be stuck to the left, and eventually our hamburger little button, this guy here, is going to go over to there. Now for the navigation itself, we're going to be jumping around a little bit on this one, just so you know. So my nav, I'm going to give this a position of fixed, which is going to pull it out of the flow, and is going to make things a little bit better. But now you can see the button that we're going to be using has jumped to where we want that button to be, and this is sort of in a fixed spot. So now as I scroll, it's coming with us. It's not going to stay like that. It's not going to be a fixed navigation in that sense, but you're going to see shortly how this is actually going to work. So the button's in the right place. We're going to devote an own video to the button itself, and because we want to get a hamburger in there, we're going to have a little animation on it. I just want to get the navigation itself set up. So on my nav, the position fixed is good, but we're also going to give this a background of var color dark, and the color itself, we'll give it a var of color light, which won't do much yet, but we're gonna fix that because right now everything is a link in there. And we're gonna say a top of 0, bottom of 0, left of 0, and a right of 0. So that means it's gonna fill up the entire screen, and we're gonna give it a Z index of 100 to pull it in front of everything else. So this is when the navigation is open, it's gonna cover our whole screen. Even if you scroll or do anything, you're always gonna see your navigation, and then when we close it, it will disappear. I'm going to be we're going to have two different states. So what I'm going to do is a transform of translate X. So we're just going to move it off to the left. And my translate X is going to be 100%. So if that's on, you can see that, whoop, it's gone. Where'd it go? So actually for now, let's just put that to 50, just so, not 500, 50. So you can see what that's doing is it's moving it over 50% of itself. So it's always based on its own width, but its width is 100%, so it's 100% of the viewport. So if I do 100%, it moves the entire thing off of the screen. So I'm doing 100% to move it off completely. Now for now, I'm going to leave that at 0, but eventually, just so we can actually style it up and we can see what we're doing, but eventually that will be changed. And we're going to add a transition on here of the transform 250 milliseconds. And to be consistent, we'll use our cubic Bezier. And on this, once again, we'll do a 0.5, 0, 0.5, 1, because again, it's very similar to ease in out. If you'd rather use the ease in out, you definitely could. We have our nav list. So the nav list, we're going to want this to have a, display of flex, and not for, or actually before we do that, let's just say list style is none. I'm going to do a display of flex, but they're still going to stay on top of each other. It's just because we have a few extra things we can add to this. So we'll give it a height of 100%, so it actually has the height that we want it to. And this is where right now, because of the display flex, they're going next to each other. We can't really see them very well, so just really fast, just so we can see what's going on. Nav link. So we can see our items are going next to each other because it's display flex. But now what I'm going to do is my flex direction will become column, which sort of puts it back to how it was. You might be going, well, what's the point of that? But the nice, cool thing with this is then we can use our justify content space evenly, and it's going to space them evenly in that vertical space like that. And then all we need to do is set an align items center, gotta spell it right, and then everything ends up bang in the middle, just like that. Now there is some extra spacing on that, so I'm also going to say that margin of 0, padding of 0, which should fix any weird issues with the alignment that we were just having. On the nav links, since we're here, we're going to give them the font weight of var font weight bold. We'll also give them the font size. Let's make them bigger. Var font size H2. If you had a whole bunch of links on here, you may, whoops, I had a double var on there. Sorry about that. You might want to avoid the H2. It is quite big. Maybe it is too big actually. But I think it works. It's very in your face though. But if you want to step that down to an H3, you could do that, or if you wanted to set your custom size on it as well, we could do that. But I'm going to leave it with that big, bold, in-your-face style of the H2, and you can decide if you'd rather something else. We're also going to say the text decoration is going to be set to none for those ones. We can add in our nav link hover. For the hover, I think all we'll do is color var color accent and just leave it like that. So if we hover on top, we can see it's working, or if we tab through, you can see that that outline is coming through on the focus state that we set for everything. So fantastic. I think that's looking really nice and good for that. But this is the stage where I am going to do, all I'm going to do for now actually is come back and set this back to 100% to hide it away. So it's hidden off the screen. And in the next video, what we'll do is we'll style up our button, and then we'll actually get our button working. So when we click it, the menu will slide in and out. All right, so for the hamburger, I'm going to bring all of that down right after the nav right here. And we can start working on the hamburger itself. Now, there are other ways of doing a hamburger. I'm going to do it the more complicated way. The only reason I'm doing this is because it opens up some extra possibilities in terms of what we can do with it, to add little animations and to have fun with it, because all the different pieces will be animatable and individual instead of it just being a single icon. But it's up to you. If you'd rather just bring in a single icon, put it there and leave it like that, that's completely fine. But I think this would be a lot more fun. So if you remember, we had a class of hamburger. So what I'm going to start with is doing our background. I'm going to give it the background of our color dark. Again, if maybe you change your color scheme and you want it to go along with your color scheme, it will be useful. I'm going to give it a width of 2M, and I'm going to give it a height of just 3 pixels. We'll give it a border radius too, border radius of, I'll do 1M, which is just like a massive number, but because it's going to work. And I'm going to give it a display of block, not black, block. Because by default it was a span, which is inline, and I just want to make sure that we don't run into any issues with it. And I'm going to give it a position of relative, because we're going to be using pseudo elements with absolute positioning, and this will make our life much easier. So if we come and take a look, we can see inside my button now I have that black line that is showing up. So that is part 1 of our hamburger. For the next 2 parts, we will be using pseudo elements. So hamburger before and dot hamburger after. And just like the pseudo element that we used last time, the first thing we want to do is give it some content, but the content will be blank. Again, pseudo elements will not work unless you do give them some content. The position in this case will be absolute. So I don't have to declare position a display of block like I did last time, because I have position absolute. It's either giving it a position or giving it a display property is required. We're going to say a left of 0 and a right of 0, and that's going to mean it matches the width of our other one. Again, that's because I have position relative here. If not, it would have been relative to the whole screen, and we'd have a huge bar going all the way across. The background we do need to set, so var color dark. We have a lot of similarities actually here, so I'm going to break some of this off. We're going to refactor on the fly here. Let's copy all this and paste it right there. And what I'm going to actually do is add .hamburger here, because they're all going to have this, 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 and this, and even the display block. So we can, we don't need display block on the other ones. So I'm going to grab all of that and put it here, so we don't have to repeat ourselves twice. They're always going to have the same color, same width, same height. That is, and the same border radius. So that means I don't need my background color here. And there we go. So that is perfect. And we will eventually be giving these all a transition as well, because we need things to be moving around a little bit. So I'm actually going to put that here as well. Transition, transform. We'll start with 250 and just an ease in out. They're going to be pretty simple animations, so I don't know if we need that fancy cubic Bezier or not. Oh, I forgot my comma right here, so that's going to break everything. There we go. So it looks the same as it did before. And the reason is these are pretty much just going to be hiding out underneath what we already have. So what I'm going to do is say my .hamburger before is going to have a top of 6 pixels, and my hamburger after is going to have a bottom of 6 pixels. And the reason I'm doing 6 is because we have a height of 3, so it's going to have a height of 3, an empty space of 3, and then we'll have the rest of the hamburger. And just like that, you can see we're starting to get a little hamburger icon thing coming in there. Isn't that cool? So it does take a little bit of setup to do it, but again, I do personally think that it is worth doing. The next thing I'm going to do in here is, let's come all the way up to here. I have my hamburger. So I have my nav toggle as well, which is the button itself. This I'm going to add a little bit of padding to it, 0.25 and I'm going to give it a background of transparent to make it disappear, and I'm going to give it a border of 0, so my border is turned off. And there we go, we're left with our little hamburger icon right there. One thing is, it does not have a hover state on it, and I know you can't see the little hand icons yourselves when I do this, but when you're testing it, you should be able to. So on the nav toggle, I'm also going to add a cursor of pointer, or else there is no little hand icon for the people when they hover on top of it, which can be a little bit strange. And I did 0.25 we can probably do 0.5 on that padding and not have it affect anything on terms of its positioning, just to give us a bit more room that we can actually click on in that overall area. So I think we'll do that for my nav toggle. Now, another thing I'm going to do for my nav toggle is I'm going to give it a position of absolute, which is going to sort of ruin things, but then I'm going to say that the right is 0, and it should pull it back to exactly where it was. Almost. It's not including the padding on there, actually. So we can say the right. So I'll do a 1em on there, which is the same as the padding that I put, so to keep the distance where we want it to be. And if you want to be really safe, you could also say a top of 1em. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm also going to give it a Z index that's really, really big. So you might remember we had our navigation coming in front of everything. So when I do that, when I had my nav open, remember this is going down to a 0, I want to make sure that my button actually stays in front of that. Now it's hard to see. Now you can't see it that it's there, but because the color is the same as my background color, but I promise you it is. And that's really important. So that's the reason I'm doing that, is because we want to always have that button available to us. So let's bring that back up to, or even, while we're here, just to prove it to you. Let's change this to color accent just for a second, and then we can bring that back up to a 0. So you can see that that is there. So by being position absolute and having a higher Z index, we know that it's coming all the way in front. Now there's this problem that we're going to come around and fix soon. But for now, all of this is starting to come together, but let's bring this back up to 100%. Pretty much we need to add in the functionality with the JavaScript now to actually get that to open and close. So we're going to go ahead and do that in the next video. All right, so what I've done is I've added an index.js file already here in a JavaScript folder. So what we're going to need to do is come into our document and add a script src js/index.javascript close script. And now we can actually start doing something with it. So if we come into here now, we do need to do a few things in here. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a const nav toggle, which is going to look for my document.query selector, and we called it nav toggle. And I also want to get, let's just leave it like that for now. And we're going to say our nav toggle, add event listener, click. When we click, we want to do a function. So I'm going to use an arrow function here. And we want the document.body class list toggle. And we're going to toggle a class that we haven't created yet called nav open. By doing that, it's going to mean every time we click on the our button, it should add that class. And to test to see if this is actually working or not, what we're going to do is we're going to come over to my CSS file here, and let's create nav. I'm going to come all the way after all this nav stuff. Yeah, I'm going to come all the way after all my navigation stuff here, but we're going to stick right here. I'm going to say nav open, background is red. So again, this is on the navigation. This is adding this class to the body itself. So if we come and take a look, and if I click on that, the body itself is getting a red background on it. And if I click again, it should toggle that off and all of that disappears. So it is turning on and off just like that. So that is awesome and fantastic that it is working. So I know my JavaScript is working. So I don't. So instead of changing the background to red, though, we have some other things that we want to do. So my nav open itself, we're not going to be doing anything with, but we're going to be doing a lot of things that are inside of here. So the first one that we're going to do is my nav itself. So if the nav is opened, the nav itself is going to get the transform translate x of 0. So what that means is when we click that, it slides out. When I click again, it slides back in. So we've added that functionality in, and we can see it's working out fantastically. It's going in and out, and then I can click on my links. So that's really cool. Now there is one problem. If I click on a link, it's actually going to bring me to that part of the page because you can see it scroll down. If I go to my work, it's scrolling down further, but I can't close it because my icon has disappeared. And ideally, when we click on it, it would just disappear. Anyway, it would close itself when we click on that, but we're going to add that functionality in a second. For now, though, what I'm going to do is with my nav open, my nav toggle is going to switch from a position absolute to a position of fixed. The reason I'm having it switch is because I don't want it to always be position fixed because I don't want it to scroll with the site. So now if I click that, if I scroll, we still keep this in view, but then if we go back to here, it scrolls out of view with the rest of my header. So that is perfect. And that means if I click on About Me and then I close it, you can see it actually brought me to the right point in my site, which is cool. So we're off to a good start. Now, where the really fun things also can come in is we can do our nav open.hamburger. And I'm going to do a transform on this of rotate. And we're going to rotate it 0.625 turns. So turn like that. You can also do this in degrees, but I learned about the turn unit and I like showing people that it exists. So this is a nice fun one. So I can turn it. So now what's going to happen let's scroll back up. When I click, you can see it's rotating around. Now that might seem really, really strange. Why would I be doing that? Well, what I also want to do is my nav open.hamburger. We'll do my hamburger after. We'll just get a opacity of 0, so it's just going to disappear. But more importantly will be my nav open hamburger before. Because what we're going to do with this is we're actually going to rotate it. Transform. Rotate 90 degrees. Now, we do have to do a second transform on this, but you're going to see that what that's doing is it's pretty much turning it into an X. So you can see when I click, whoop, and whoop. So that's kind of fun, right? But the X isn't really working right now because of the way it's positioned. So here I'm just going to put a space and do a translate X. And the amount is I'm going to do -6 pixels because we were offset by 6, so moving it back by 6 pixels, and it gives us a nice X. So now when we do that way, it looks like that. And then when I click, it's going to fly around and make a nice X like that. You know what? Originally, I had this as black, but I think I'm actually going to keep it with this color. So it's always going to be working like that. So there we go. My hamburger is working. Everything is good. The only problem with it is now if I click on my work, it doesn't actually do what we want it to. It brings us there, but we want this to also close so we're in the right place right away. So to do that, we're going to come back to our JavaScript. So to do that, we are going to need to get each individual link up here. So we're going to create that. This will be a nav, we'll call it nav links, and it will be our document.query selector. So this creates a node list, query selector all, where it's going to find all the nav link. So it should find all of them. So if we go and take a look now what we can do is we can say our nav links dot for each. So for all of them, we have for each link inside of there, we are going to do a function. So just like before, we're going to need to create a event listener. So on each link, we're going to add an event listener for a click. And if somebody clicks, once again, we will do a function. We'll use an arrow function again. And so here we can say that our document.body.class list, but at this time, instead of toggling it, we're just going to remove our nav open from the class list. And the reason I want to simply remove it instead of doing anything else with it is because I think it's really important, just in case we somehow get it clicked or activated when it's off screen, we don't want it to somehow open. I don't think that's really a possibility, but why take the chance? Here, we're just always removing the class of nav open instead of toggling it, because the only way we should be able to click it is if it's already open in the first place. Yes. So let's hit save on that, and we should be able to see if we come up, we can open it. If I click out here, nothing's happening, but if I click on my services, it brings us to my services and it's closed. So again, we can bring it up, go to my work, and we're in the my work section already, and it's closing just like that. So it's an added little bit of functionality that we can do when we want to move around in there. So just like that, that is all done. I think it's looking pretty good. Now there's one last thing I want to do while we're here. When we go to the different sections, or let's say I come and I click on this button, it's just jumping to that section, which isn't the best user experience. So I'm going to come over to my style sheet here. I'm going to come all the way up to the top. We can do that right here under my general styles. On my HTML element, I'm going to add in scroll behavior smooth. And it's a nice, easy way without JavaScript to add smooth scrolling to a site. So let's come back up. And now that I'm here, if I click on my work, it scrolls down there automatically. So that's really, really cool. And if I come up and I go onto one of these links and I do About Me, you can see it's scrolling down as that closes. So if you had other links somewhere else, it would automatically just add some smooth scrolling, just with native CSS, which is really, really awesome. Now, I did have some trouble with this in my own, in here with the Scrimba editor. When I'm recording, it doesn't seem to be an issue when I'm not recording, and I've never seen an issue with this outside of the Scrimba editor. So for now, or in future videos, you may see that it's commented out. Just make sure you comment it back on in case you run in, if you want to have that enabled on your own site, if you download from the final version of this. Just in case you're worrying about browser support, we're already using grid and custom properties, but if ever you run into a browser that doesn't support it for some reason, it's just going to jump down and have the same behavior that it did before. So it's not going to cause any issues whatsoever. And yeah, I think everything is coming together. This page is all wrapped up now. Everything is working fantastically. So all we have left to do is create the other page. So in the next video, we're going to look at doing that. It's not going to be anything that is too complicated. And then we're going to be able to wrap this up, move on over to DigitalOcean, and get this baby online. Okay, so for this page, what I've already done is I've copied my index.html and made a new file here, portfolio item.html, and I've deleted everything in there. This would act as the template file that you could use to build out all your different portfolio items, to put a bit of information on them. I've deleted everything. The only thing I've kept is my header and my footer, but what we're actually going to do is come back into here and copy this intro section as well. And we're going to leave the intro section here, but I wanted to copy and paste it just to take a look at how I'm going to do this. So here I'd put the title, and we'd keep this strong thing going, of my project. And then this could just be, and the image here, I'm going to change to the image that we were originally using. So we'll just do portfolio01.jpg. It's going to work out perfectly there. Obviously, the alt is going to be a little bit different, so we'll get rid of that. So if we come and take a look at what that looks like, we can see it right here. It's just putting the picture instead of the picture of yourself that you might have had, and everything else should be working fine. We've already done all the CSS for that, so it should be working no matter what screen size or anything like that we're on. Now, where things are a little bit different is we do need a new section over here. I'm actually going to take this ID of home off. We are going to have to update these links as well in a second. Over here, what we're going to do is we're going to add a couple of things. So I'm going to add a div class of, we'll call it portfolio item individual. It's a long name, but I want it to be super clear what it's being used for. It's not going to have too much styling on it. In here, we're going to have a couple of things. So we're just going to have, we'll put in a paragraph. We're going to put in an image, and I've brought in a new image to use for this one. So if we come and look in our images folder, you will find a portfolio details.jpg that I've brought in just for this page. So that is our image folder, and then portfolio details.jpg. I'll put a blank alt because I don't know what the pictures you will be using are. And we don't need a class on that, I don't think. If we need to put one, we can always add one on. And I'm going to put a couple more paragraphs down here below it. And I'm just going to copy some filler text to use. So if I hit save on that and we come take a look, You can see it is coming together. We have a nice big image going a long way across, which I think is looking cool. Now we're going to modify this a little bit because the text obviously isn't going to work if it's like that. And we're getting, but overall, I think it is actually working out pretty well. So we're going to do a couple of interesting things here on this portfolio item individual. So let's go into my CSS, and I'm going to include this all the way down at the bottom. I can come and put a new comment, portfolio item individual, and we can style that up a little bit. So what I'm going to do is, like on the other ones, we'll give it a bit of padding. So we can do padding of, we'll leave the top and the bottom with, I'm going to leave the top with nothing. So we're going to do a 0 for the top. We'll do 2M for the left and right. And maybe we'll do a 2M also on the bottom just to give it a bit of space away from the footer. And what I'm also going to do, I'm going to give this a max width of 1,000 pixels because it is a standard that we've used in a couple of other places in the site. And with a max width there, we also want to do a margin of 0 auto. And just like that, we've sort of finished what we need to do here. I don't want to do anything too fancy. We can keep the nice title area. And then here we fall into these nice big images with some description of what your project actually is. You could throw as many images in there as you want. If you do find the text is getting too long, you could change the max width on that. Or we could come in and say the same class, but our paragraphs inside of there, and give them a max width of like 800 pixels maybe. And you can play with that number. What it's going to do is just give you something like this where the images will be wider. In general, I like doing things like that because it makes it a little bit easier to read text when it's not too long. And I might even shrink that down to like 600. And if we do that, we can also give this a margin left of auto and a margin right of auto. I'm not doing a margin 0 auto or something like that because I want to keep the top and bottom margins, the default margins that were already on my paragraphs, because it means we're getting the spacing where it would take those off. So it sort of focuses our text. We can have bigger images that break out of that a little bit, and then we still have our regular paragraphs that describe the project a little bit. The more text you have, the more you can describe a project. Don't just talk about what what the project was, but talk about what you did on the project and why that was a good thing. The more details you can put and the more information you can give on the insights of your project instead of on the actual project itself, the better that could be. But this will set the template for you to have a nice simple page that you can use for your portfolio items. The one thing we do want to make sure is if we click here, we can actually go back to the pages that we want to go back onto. So what I'm going to do is the home, I'm just going to set to be index.html. And I'm going to copy this and paste it there, but leaving the hashtag at the end. And the reason I'm doing that is because now we're on my individual project. If I click here and I go to home, it'll bring me back to here. But what I've done is I've put the links to all of these just to go to that page. If I click here and I go to About Me, it's going to bring me to the About part of that page. So it's always going to go back to the right place. If somebody looks at a portfolio item and then they decide they want to go look at something else, they can get to that section really, really easily without any fuss. So right now, as I mentioned, I've put the links to all of them going to this one template page, but that would be up to you now to populate as many portfolio pages as you need and to set all of that up for your different portfolio items. And that is it. We are done with this template. Everything is good and dandy and working fantastically. And that is it for now. The website is all put together. It's ready to go. So in the next video, we're going to be talking about the next steps and how you can start getting this online. All right, so we're going to look at how we can customize the fonts, the colors, and different things with this site. So we'll start off with the fonts, then we'll move into the colors. It's all super easy to customize. So let's say you found some new fonts on Google Fonts. So that's what I have done, and I have a new link. I'm going to update this link with my new one. Just remember, you have to do it on all your pages. Don't just do it on the one. So I update that link there, and then I'm going to go over to my CSS. And over here in my CSS, I can update my font families. So I'm going to put Roboto as my secondary here, and then I have Laura that I'm going to bring in as my primary. So if I just do that, my font weights are going to switch over to 400 and 700 because those are the weights that I brought in. And just like that, we can see that it has updated the fonts throughout the whole site. Super nice and easily. Really quickly, everything will be updated because they were all set up to be using those font families and using those custom properties. And just like that, we can also update our colors super, super easily. So let's say you don't like that green. That's not your brand color. I can come onto my color accent and update that one to a red color. And just like that, anywhere that was using it in the site has now switched on over to use that red color. And of course, if you wanted to switch the entire theme, I did use a light and a dark, but technically you could come in here and do something like this, and it would invert your color scheme throughout the whole site. So now it has become a dark site. I can't see my logo anymore, but everything else should be working. There'd be a few little updates that we'd have to make in a couple places for the dark theme to work, or this is not really even a dark theme, it's an inverted theme from what I had. But overall, you can see that it's really, really quick and easy to make these changes to the site, and everything will be running super well and super easily. So if ever you want to customize stuff, play with the box shadows, play with the font sizing, all of it, all you have to do is play with these custom properties and you are good to go. Your design is your own design after that. So have some fun with it, make it your own, and then we're going to be looking at how we can get this up on DigitalOcean. In this video, we're going to be exploring DigitalOcean Droplets. We're going to be seeing what a droplet actually is and how you can get one up and running. So what is a droplet? This is directly from their website. They say that DigitalOcean Droplets are Linux-based virtual machines that run on top of virtualized hardware. Each droplet you create is a new server you can use, either standalone or as part of a larger cloud-based infrastructure. Now, that might sound a little bit confusing, but really they're pretty simple in how they work. They're essentially virtual servers that can host your website or web apps. They're extremely easy to use. They're fast and easy to set up and destroy, which means that if you set one up, you just want to test something out, you do a little bit of work on it, and you want to get rid of it right away after, you can do it right away. It takes seconds to destroy one if you don't want to have it anymore. They come with an automatic firewall. Security is really easy with DigitalOcean, and they do really emphasize a lot when it comes to making sure that things are as safe as possible. They're both extremely customizable and super flexible. So when you're setting it up, you can really customize all the different settings you need for it, but they're flexible in the sense that you can make changes to it once it's set up. You don't have to destroy it and create a new one just because you need to make a few changes to what you already had. You can just modify your existing one. And one of the best things about them is you only pay for exactly what you're using. So it can, if you spin one up, you only run it for like 15 minutes. You're not paying a monthly fee like you might with another web hosting company where you just locked yourself into a year. When you're only paying for your droplets that you're currently using. If you're not running any droplets, you're not paying. You fire one up, you get rid of it. You only paid for that 3 seconds it was up there. That's all you're actually paying for. Now, how do we set up a droplet? It is relatively easy to do. What you're going to want to do is create your account first and use the link that is in the description to get your free $50 credit. So you can use that towards testing everything out before you start jumping in. Now, when you first create your account, it's also going to ask you to make your first project. Once you've made your first project, you can just click here on droplets. If you're not sure about setting up your project, don't worry about it too much. It's going to ask you some really basic questions and you'll be all set up and ready to go. And you can always create new projects, as many as you need to inside of DigitalOcean. So once you're logged in, you're ready to go. You can click on droplets on the side here, and there's a nice big button that should say create droplet because you won't have any droplets yet. When you get there, you're going to run into this, and this can seem a little bit intimidating if you've never had to look at this before, because they are running on Linux. So you have to choose your distribution of Linux that you want and choose your plan, your pricing, and all of that. And you might be looking at this going, I don't know what distribution of Linux that I want because I've never really had to worry about that before. That's completely fine. They do make our life a little bit easier. What I'm going to suggest you do is, instead of worrying about the distributions right now, is click on where it says Marketplace. The Marketplace is a whole bunch of setups that are sort of pre-created. Everything is lined up. It has all the different things you're going to need. So you can choose from here. You'll see here are the recommended for you. They do have a WordPress one there. So if you want to spin up a WordPress really fast and quickly, you just click on that and there'll be a few more steps. At this stage, though, what I'm going to do is suggest that we go and click on where it says see all marketplace apps. That's going to show us all the available ones. If you scroll down, you can see there's 110 results. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there. So if you know exactly what you want, you might find something that is perfect for your needs. Maybe you just want a Node.js server, because for this case, we're going to go with a LAMP stack. So LAMP, and you might have heard of LAMP, which is Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. And we're going to go with LAMP. So instead of Apache, it's running Nginx. Because I'm doing it with static files, it is going to run a little bit faster. So if you're really not sure which one to pick, we can go with follow along with this one for now. But if you have a certain build that you want, go and look through their marketplace. They might have something exactly that's going to meet your needs. Once you do that, it's going to bring you to this page where it's just going to give you more information on what this marketplace LEMP stack is. So it's showing you all the different software that it's going to be installing. We're not even worried that it's bringing us, we don't even really need the MySQL or PHP right now, but it's coming with everything. It's pre-set up. It's ready to go right out of the box. So now we can just click on Create LEMP Droplet. And when we click that, it's going to bring us back to this screen where it used to have the Linux distributions along the top, but now it's brought us back. It's replaced that with saying that we're using our LEMP stack here. And then it's going to ask us to choose a plan. Now, if you're doing something that's a really big site or you need something really specific, you might want to go into one of these performance plans. And if you're not sure which one you want, you can go with Help Me Choose. For now, we're going to go with the starter standard one here. This is perfect for something like ours, which is a static site right now, or even things like blogs and web apps, all of that. This is a great place to start. If ever you need to make a change, as I said, it is very flexible. Once you've chosen the starter plan, or that's already going to be selected by default, we want to go into the pricing. And by default, the pricing is set to the $40 a month. Early on, I would suggest scroll all the way over and go with the $5 per month one. It's probably all you're going to need at the beginning, unless you know you're going with something where you're going to need a little bit more than that. So you can see it's giving us one CPU. It's giving us an SSD with 25 gigabytes of space, and it's giving us 1,000 gigabytes of transfer. I think starting off, that is perfectly fine. You get what you pay for. So if you need something more powerful or more space, you can always work your way up. Now, if all you need is more SSD space, but you don't need more transfer or a more powerful CPU, you can go to add block storage and add volume. So you can just add SSD space. So you can just add hard drive space that way, where you're adding onto there, but you're not getting anything else. So you can balance out the pricing a little bit if that's the only extra thing that you need. And once you've added your block storage, if you need it, we won't in this case, you can then choose a data center region. I went with Toronto because I'm in Montreal, so it's close to me. You can just choose any of the ones around the world that they have. Just choose something close to you and you're good to go. And then it's going to also ask you to select additional options if you want: private networking, IPv6, user data, and monitoring. It's up to you if you want any of them. For now, we're going to skip those, and we're going to come down to the authentication. Now here, the default is one-time password. We're going to leave it on one-time password. An SSH key is a lot more secure. So if it's something that's going to be a client site or even your personal site in the long run, it could be worth setting up. But for the time being, we're going to go with a one-time password because it's faster and simpler to set up. And you can always switch to an SSH key later on. You're not stuck with this. You're not stuck with your one-time password if you do want to change to the SSH key later. And the last thing after that, we're getting right near the end. We need to choose how many droplets we want. So by default, it's one. We're good with one. And we want to choose a host name. So it's a random string of characters. You can change it to what you want it to be. And it's just so you can remember them by. Your droplet name can only contain. So you just want to make it something you can remember it by. So just give it a name that makes sense to you. And if you want to add any tags, you can. You're going to select the project. You only have one project, so just attach it to that project. And you can add backups if you want. Backups are system-level backups taken once a week, and each one is retained for 4 weeks, and they always cost 20% of the droplet price. So because ours is $5 a month, it would cost us an extra $1 per month. Now, if you're going to be working on Git, and say you're on GitHub or something like that, and every time you push to your master, it's automatically building out your site, that's really awesome. That's cool, and that's sort of keeping track of everything anyway. But backups are always a good thing to have, especially if it's something like a client site or your own personal site. If it's your client site or your portfolio site and you want to make sure that nothing ever goes wrong, I'd strongly encourage you to have a backup, because in this day and age, and at that price, I think it is quite affordable. Next thing we're going to do is click on Create Droplet, and that's going to bring us to this screen where you're going to see the little progress bar going along. It generally takes under a minute to create your droplet, so that blue progress bar will slowly make its way across, and then you'll get this where it disappears, and you're going to get your IP address. This is where your site is. Your site is at that address. As soon as you see this, you could technically go and visit it, but there's not much to see there right now. So instead of going to visit it, what I'd encourage you to do is click on where it says My Portfolio. When we click on My Portfolio, it's going to bring us into this screen. And what we're going to want to do is click where it says Console. Because one thing we have to do before we can do anything else is we need to reset our password. When we signed up for a one-time password, it's going to email us that password, but the password has to be reset the first time you put it in. So when we click on the console here, it's actually going to open a console in the browser in a new window. You could be doing this if you're on Mac through Terminal, or if you're on PC through PowerShell or Commander or something like that. But we have this built in. It's a nice simple terminal that's directly connected to your droplet. So it's going to ask you for your login, and it will ask you for your password. You should have received an email that's going to have both of those things. So you'll see your IP address, your username and your password. I don't mind showing you my password because, as I said, it has to be reset as soon as you put it in. The username will always be root, so you can put in root where your login name goes, and then it's going to ask for your password. I would go to here, I would copy it, so command select it, command or control C, and then you come over to here and you paste it in with, if you're on a PC, control V, or if you're on a Mac, command V, and that's going to paste it in. Now, when you paste it in, it's not going to look like anything happened because it stays blank. That's fine. Just hit enter or return, and it's going to go to the next step. It's a password. They're trying to make it stay confidential, so they don't show it on the screen when you're entering your passwords in a terminal. Once you put the password in, it's going to say you're required to change your password immediately. So right away, it's going to ask for your current password. So just command V again and paste it in there. And then it's going to ask for your new passwords. You type in a new password. Once again, as you're typing it, it's just going to be blank. It's going to look like there's nothing there. That's completely fine. Just keep on going. It's going to ask you to retype it again just to make sure you spelled everything right. And as soon as you've done that, it's going to give you a little message saying that everything is pretty much good to go. And you can close this window down once you've done that. If you visit your IP address after that, you're going to see something that looks like this. So it's not very exciting. It's saying, please log into your droplet to configure the LEMP installation. And now we want to get our site up on here instead of seeing a screen like this. So we're going to look at how we can do that in the next video. All right, so let's see how we can put our files onto our droplet. We're going to be doing it with an FTP client. So some FTP software that you might want to use, there's FileZilla, CyberDuck, or Fetch. You can click on any of these here. It's going to bring you right to their website. Fetch is probably the easiest one to use, but it is Mac only, but the interface is the cleanest and simplest one. So if you're on Mac, maybe you'd want to go with Fetch. For this, though, I am going to be using FileZilla. I am on PC. I want to do something that both PC and Mac users could follow along with. So I am using FileZilla, but it's always the same thing. And there's other FTP clients out there as well. It's not just these three. Use whichever one you want. The interface might be a little bit different, but the information is the same no matter which one you are using. So here I have FileZilla opened, and what I'm going to want to do is click on this weird little icon that's in the left here, and what that's going to do is it's going to open my site manager. Inside my site manager, I clicked on new site just to create a site. I called it DO for DigitalOcean Portfolio, and then I came over to my protocol and I changed it to SFTP, which is the SSH file transfer protocol. And then here I need to put in my host and my port number. The host is just going to be your IP address, and the port we're going to use is 22, which is for the SFTP. If you wanted to go in through a regular FTP, you could use port 80. It's going to ask for your, on my login type, I'm saying ask for password. That was where it was. I'm going to leave it like that. And in my user, I'm going to put in root right there. Once I've put in my username there, I can just click on connect all the way down here. And it's going to pop up with something that looks like this. It's saying unknown host key. The server's host key is unknown. You have no guarantee that the server is the computer you think it is. And it's showing the fingerprint for there. This is just saying, are you sure you're connecting to the right place? We can't be 100% sure because the key is an unknown key. This is because we haven't set it up with SSH. We can, for now, just click on always trust this host because we know. So we're adding that to our cache. Click that and click OK. Then it's going to ask you for your password. So you put in your password that you just created in the terminal in the last video, and it's going to log you into your droplet. Now, the way FileZilla works is everything on the left here is my computer, and everything on the right here is my droplet. This is all the different things that are in my droplet. A lot of this got created because I went with the LEMP stack, so it created a whole bunch of stuff that's already in here. Now, when you start with, you might be inside your root folder, so you might have to take a step back. And then once you've taken that step back, you're going to want to find the var folder. So it's var folder. Once you're inside the var folder, you're going to want to look for a www folder. And then once you find the www, there should only be one thing in there, which is the HTML folder. Click on that HTML folder and you should see that there's an index file in there, and that is it. And what we want to do is we want to replace that index.html file with our own files. So I've downloaded mine from Scrimba. If you want to follow along with exactly that at the moment and download from Scrimba itself, I'm going to do that at the very end of this video. We'll look at how we can do that. So what I did is I downloaded everything from Scrimba. I opened up the folder, I unzipped it, and then I grabbed all the files I needed. It was everything except for the normalize and the readme. If you put those up there, it's not going to cause any problem, but we don't need those files. We might so there's no reason to put them online. So I grabbed those, I literally just dragged over to here. You can see that it's there. I let go, and it's going to tell me that there's already an index.html. Do I want to replace it? Yes, I do. And within probably under a second, everything was uploaded. Once it was all uploaded, I went back to here. I hit refresh. So this is just on the IP address I was on. I hit refresh, and bang, just like that, my site is up here. It's live, and it is available for anybody to see. It's as easy as that to get a site up on a DigitalOcean droplet. Now, if you do want to download from Scrimba, you just go to the very last video, but just make sure you scroll all the way to the end, because wherever you are in the video, it's going to download that state. So make sure you're at the end of the last video where we were creating the website. And if you go to the little gear icon, you can go down to where it says download zip. Click on that, and it's going to download all the files for you. So if you want to test it out and put everything else and put it all up there, or then maybe make your own changes to it and then put it up there, you can go ahead and do that.